The rain hammered down on Madison Avenue like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding against the cracked asphalt where Officer Rachel Turner stood, frozen, her hand trembling over her holster. "Don't talk." The voice cut through the storm, not a command but a desperate plea from a man she'd dismissed as just another struggling single father. In 12 seconds, everything she believed about heroes would shatter. Welcome to a story that proves courage doesn't live in uniforms or badges. Sometimes it sleeps in the shadows, with those society has forgotten. I invite you to follow this journey to its stunning conclusion, and please comment your city below so I can see how far this story has traveled. The patrol car's wipers fought a losing battle against the October deluge as Officer Rachel Turner guided her cruiser down Madison Avenue's darkest stretch. 3 years on the force, 27 years old, and still naive enough to believe that evil announced itself with sirens and flashing lights. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before her shift ended, 13 minutes before she could drive home to her empty apartment and pretend the job hadn't eaten another piece of her soul. "Unit 7-4, what's your 20 shutter?" The dispatcher's voice crackled through the static. Rachel grabbed the radio, her wedding ring, catching the streetlight, a ghost she still wore despite the divorce papers signed 8 months ago. "Madison and 3rd, heading back to the station." "Copy that. Stay safe out there, Turner. Stay safe." The words echoed hollow in the car's interior, mixing with the rain's percussion. She'd been safe her whole life, safe suburban childhood, safe college boyfriend who became a safe husband until he found someone safer than a cop's wife. Safe choices, safe routes, safe assumptions about who the good guys were and where danger lived. The streetlights flickered, casting amber pools that the rain immediately shattered. This part of Madison had been dying for years, strangled by foreclosures and forgotten by city planners who preferred their poverty invisible. Boarded windows stared like dead eyes from buildings that once housed dreams. Now they sheltered ghosts, human and otherwise. Rachel slowed the cruiser, something pulling at her instincts. 3 years of training screamed at her to keep driving to make it back to the station where coffee waited and fellow officers would complain about overtime. But something felt wrong. The rain seemed too loud, the shadows too deep, the street too empty even for this forgotten corner of the city. She pulled over, engine idling, watching the rain cascade down her windshield in rivers. Her hand unconsciously checked her service weapon, a Glock 19 with 15 rounds she'd fired thousands of times at the range, but never once in anger. The weight felt both reassuring and accusatory. "Just 13 minutes, she whispered to herself, but her hand was already reaching for the door handle. The rain hit her like a physical force, immediately soaking through her uniform despite the department-issued raincoat. Water ran off her cap's brim in steady streams, blurring her vision. She should have stayed in the car, should have driven away, should have listened to that voice. Every cop develops the one that whispers about going home alive. Instead, she stood there, rain drumming against her shoulders, searching the darkness for whatever had made her stop. The street stretched empty in both directions, lined with the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving commercial district. Lee's Hardware shuttered. Marino's Deli foreclosed. The old Regal Theater condemned. Each storefront a tombstone marking the death of someone's American dream. Movement caught her eye, subtle, almost lost in the rain's chaos. There, pressed against the brick wall of what used to be a pawn shop, stood a man. Not hiding exactly, but not wanting to be seen either. The rain had plastered his clothes to his body, revealing a frame that spoke of meals missed and pride swallowed. Beside him, a German Shepherd mix sat alert, its fur matted with rain, but its eyes sharp with intelligence. Rachel's hand drifted toward her holster, not drawing, just finding comfort in proximity. She'd answered enough domestic calls, enough disturbances to recognize the signs of trouble. But this man didn't have the aggressive stance of someone looking for a fight. If anything, he seemed protective, watchful. She took 3 steps forward, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected the dying streetlights. The man didn't move, didn't run, didn't threaten. He simply watched her approach with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone the world had clearly beaten down. "Sir, are you all right?" Her voice carried the professional distance they'd taught at the academy, firm but not aggressive, concerned but not involved. The man's lips moved, but the rain swallowed his words. She moved closer, close enough now to see the lines etched deep in his face. Not age lines, but the kind carved by worry and sleepless nights. His clothes, despite being soaked, were clean. worn thin at the elbows and knees, carefully patched in places but clean. This wasn't a vagrant or an addict. This was someone trying desperately to hold on to dignity while the world stripped it away piece by piece. "Don't talk," he said louder this time, but still barely audible over the rain's roar. "Just listen." Every protocol, every training scenario flashed through Rachel's mind. This could be a distraction, a setup, a dozen different dangers wrapped in rain and shadow. Her hand tightened on her weapon's grip, still holstered but ready. "Sir, I need you to—" "Please." The word cracked like ice breaking. "He's been watching you." The rain suddenly felt colder. Rachel's eyes swept the street, seeing nothing but sensing everything. The shadows seemed to breathe the darkness pulse with hidden threat. "Who's been watching me?" She kept her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The man David, though she didn't know his name yet, lifted his chin slightly, indicating something behind her and to the left. Not obviously, not dramatically, just the smallest gesture that spoke of someone who'd learned to communicate danger without attracting it. "Silver Honda. Parked since you started patrol. Engine running. Driver never got out." Rachel didn't turn immediately. Training kicked in? Never turn your back on a potential threat. Never reveal what you know until you're ready to act. Instead, she angled her body using her peripheral vision to catch the vehicle he'd described. They're half hidden behind a dumpster exhaust, visible in the rain-cooled air. How had she missed it? "You're sure?" David nodded, water streaming from his hair. "I see things. People ignore me so they don't hide from me." "He followed you from 10th Street. 10th Street. She'd made a traffic stop there 20 minutes ago. Routine speeding ticket, nothing memorable except the driver had been oddly nervous. Too nervous for a simple citation. She'd let him go with a warning, something her training officer would have called soft, but she'd been tired, eager to end her shift without paperwork. "Did you see the driver?" White male. 30s. Scar through his left eyebrow. Wearing a black jacket with— David paused, his dog suddenly tensing beside him, a low growl building in its throat. The shadows exploded into motion. A figure burst from the alley between buildings, moving fast despite the rain-slick pavement. Rachel's training took over hand to weapon, body squared, voice commanding, "Stop, police!" But he didn't stop, couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. The streetlight caught the knife in his hand blade, gleaming wet with rain that looked too much like blood in the amber light. 20 feet, 15, 10. Time fractured into fragments. Rachel's weapon clearing leather. The attacker's face twisted with rage or fear or madness. David moving not away but toward. The dog launching itself with primal fury. The rain falling between heartbeats, each drop suspended like crystals in the lightning flash of crisis. The collision was brutal. David hit the attacker from the side just as Rachel's finger found the trigger. They went down hard, the knife spinning away into the darkness, metal singing against concrete. The dog was on them instantly, jaws clamping on the attacker's arm, not biting through but holding, controlling. Rachel circled weapon-trained, searching for a clear shot that wouldn't risk David. Stop resisting, stop resisting. But the fight was already over. David had the man pinned using technique that spoke of training, maybe military, maybe just the hard-earned education of survival. The attacker struggled briefly, then went limp, sobbing into the rain-soaked street. "Clear," David said quietly, professionally, like someone who'd said it before in places where clear meant everyone got to go home. Rachel holstered her weapon and pulled out her cuffs, her hand surprisingly steady as she secured the attacker. Only then, only when the immediate danger passed, did the reality hit her. This man, this single father she'd been ready to dismiss as just another hard-luck story, had saved her life. "Are you hurt?" she asked David, who was slowly standing, favoring his left knee. "I'm fine." He wasn't, she could see that, but fine was relative in this part of the city. The dog sat beside its owner, tail wagging slightly despite the chaos, proud of its part in the drama. David's hand found the dog's head, a gesture of comfort and connection that said more than words about their bond. "That was—" Rachel started, then stopped. What was it, brave, stupid, incredible, all of those and more? "Necessary," David finished quietly. Sirens approached. Someone had called it in. Blue and red lights painted the rain in patriotic colors as backup arrived. The scene would soon be crowded with officers, detectives, questions, and paperwork. But for now, in this moment between crisis and conclusion, Rachel really looked at the man who'd saved her. His name was David Chen, she'd learned later. 35 years old. Former Marine honorably discharged. Lost his wife to cancer 2 years ago. Lost his job when he took too much time off to care for her. Lost his house when the medical bills came due. Now living in his 1997 Ford Explorer with his 8-year-old son Marcus and their dog Scout. Working whatever day labor he could find, showering at the gym when he could afford the day pass, doing homework with his son by flashlight, never letting the boy know how close they were to the edge. But she didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that this man, this stranger society, had written off, had risked everything to save her. Why? She asked as the first patrol car screeched to a halt nearby. David looked at her with those eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, but somehow still held on to something essential. Because that's what you do. You see someone in trouble, you help. Doesn't matter who they are or what you have. You help. Officers swarmed the scene, taking control, asking questions. The attacker, Thomas Riley, they'd learned with a history of violence against women and a particular hatred for female officers, was hauled away, still sobbing about voices and debts, and someone named Angela who'd left him for a cop. David stepped back, blending into the background as naturally as breathing, the invisible man becoming invisible again. But Rachel wouldn't let him disappear. Not this time. I need your statement. She told him, which was true, but not the whole truth. David hesitated. People like him had learned to avoid official notice, to slip through the cracks rather than risk the system's attention. But something in Rachel's eyes, genuine gratitude maybe, or recognition of his humanity, made him nod. They sat in her patrol car while the rain continued its assault on the city, the heater running, windows fogging, creating a temporary sanctuary from the chaos outside. Scout curled in the back seat, finally relaxing. David gave his statement clearly, concisely, with the kind of attention to detail that made Rachel think he'd been more than just a Marine intelligence, maybe, or special operations. He'd noticed things others would miss. The Honda's license plate partial, but enough. The attacker's shoes expensive, inconsistent with his claimed unemployment. The way he'd held the knife, trained, not street. You've done this before, Rachel said. Not a question. Different context, David replied, and she knew enough not to push. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the crime scene techs arrive, the rain still falling like it might never stop. Rachel thought about her safe life, her safe choices, her safe assumptions. Here was a man who had nothing but still gave everything, who lived in his car but maintained dignity, who could have walked away but chose to stand. Do you need anything? She asked. Medical attention, food? I could. We're fine. The reflexive response of someone who'd learned that accepting help came with costs. Pride, independence, sometimes safety itself. Your son, Rachel said carefully. Where is he now? For the first time, David's composure cracked slightly. At the library. They're open until midnight. He's doing homework. Marcus he's a good kid. Straight A's. Wants to be an engineer. Pride and pain mixed in his voice. He doesn't deserve this. Neither do you. David almost smiled, an expression that transformed his face, revealing the man he'd been before life's brutal mathematics had subtracted everything but survival. My shift's over, Rachel said, suddenly surprising herself. The library's about to close. How about I give you and Marcus a ride? We have a car. In this rain, with your knee. She'd noticed him favoring it more as the adrenaline wore off. Come on, let me do this. David studied her for a long moment. Trust was currency in his world, spent carefully and rarely. But something passed between them. Understanding maybe, or recognition of shared humanity despite their different circumstances. Okay, sit, he said finally. Thank you. They drove through the rain-soaked streets toward the library Scout alert in the back seat. David quiet beside her. Rachel thought about the randomness of it all, how she'd almost driven past, how David could have stayed hidden, how the knife could have found its mark. Thin margins between salvation and disaster, between hero and victim, between visible and invisible. The library appeared through the rain like a lighthouse, its windows glowing warm against the night, and there, visible through the glass doors, sat a young boy at a corner table, surrounded by books, writing intently in a notebook, while a security guard watched benevolently from nearby. "That's Marcus," David said, and his entire being softened. Rachel watched as David limped into the library, saw the boy's face light up, despite obviously trying to play it cool. Saw the casual way David checked the homework, the gentle hand on his son's shoulder, the careful maintenance of normalcy despite their circumstances. Marcus packed up his books efficiently, clearly used to mobile living, and followed his father out without complaint or question. "This is Officer Turner," David told his son. "She gave us a ride." Marcus studied Rachel with intelligent eyes that missed nothing his father's son. "Thank you, ma'am." "You can call me Rachel," she said, surprising herself again. They drove to where David's Explorer was parked, a 24-hour Walmart lot where security didn't hassle people who kept to themselves. The SUV was old but clean, windows covered with sunshades for privacy, the back carefully organized with plastic bins, and a sleeping area that spoke of military precision applied to homelessness. "Thank you," David said again, helping Marcus into the vehicle, Scout jumping in after. Rachel sat in her patrol car for a long moment after they'd settled in for the night, watching the rain streak her windshield. She thought about her apartment, 2 bedrooms mostly empty since the divorce. Thought about the system that could somehow let a veteran and his honor student son live in a parking lot. Thought about heroes and villains and all the gray spaces between. Her phone buzzed. Text from her sergeant. "Heard you had some excitement. You okay?" She typed back, "Fine." Hero civilian assisted. "Get his info for commendation." Rachel looked at the Explorer. Its windows now dark, a family settling in for another night of careful invisibility. A commendation would mean attention bureaucracy questions David couldn't afford to answer. The system that might help could just as easily hurt child services asking if a car was a suitable home. Social workers with good intentions and inflexible rules. "Working on it," she typed, then deleted it. Started again. "We'll follow up tomorrow." But tomorrow was already forming in her mind, different from the today she'd expected. Tomorrow would involve conversations with people she knew, her cousin, who managed a restaurant and might need reliable help, her friend at the VA, who knew how to navigate the system's maze, the sergeant who ran the department's community outreach and had more flexibility than most. She drove home through the rain, but her mind stayed in that parking lot. At her apartment, she stood in her extra bedroom empty, except for boxes she still hadn't unpacked from the divorce. 15 minutes from that Walmart, walkable to 3 schools. The rental market was tough, she knew. Background checks and credit reports and first-last deposit created walls higher than most could climb. But she was a cop. Her word meant something. Her recommendation could open doors. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about David's words, "You see someone in trouble, you help." So simple, so complicated, so much harder than pulling a trigger or writing a ticket or following procedure. Real help meant risk, meant involvement, meant stepping out of the safe zones she'd built around her life. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made coffee. Sat at her kitchen table with her laptop researching. Veteran services underfunded and overwhelmed. Homeless families, thousands in the city, invisible by necessity. The gap between working poor and stable life wider than the Grand Canyon and just as deadly to cross. She found David's service record, public information mostly, Force Recon Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Honorable discharge. The dry facts that said nothing about the man who'd watched over her from the shadows, who'd thrown himself at an armed attacker without hesitation. By dawn, she had a plan. Not perfect, not complete, but something. She found David's Explorer in a different lot. Smart never stay in the same place twice. Knocked gently on the window. David appeared instantly alert despite the early hour Scout beside him. In the back, Marcus slept on the exhausted sleep of a child carrying adult burdens. Coffee. She offered a cup from the shop down the street. David accepted it carefully, stepping out of the vehicle to avoid waking his son. The morning was crisp, yesterday's rain leaving everything clean and sharp. "I want to help," Rachel said directly. No build-up, no dance around it. "We don't need—" "Stop." She held up her hand. "Yesterday you said when someone's in trouble you help. Well, I'm in trouble. I've been a cop for 3 years, and yesterday was the first time I really saw this city, really saw the people in it. That troubles me. So help me understand. Help me do better." David studied her over the coffee cup, steam rising between them like incense. It's not that simple. I know, but neither was jumping that guy with the knife. A small smile. That was simple. He was going to hurt you. I could stop him, so I did. Then let me be simple too. You need stable housing for Marcus. I have an empty bedroom. You need work that pays enough to get back on your feet. I have connections. You need someone to see you as more than a statistic or a problem. I see you. You don't know us. I know enough. I know you're the kind of man who saves strangers. I know you're raising a son who does homework in a library instead of running the streets. I know that dog would die for you both. That's character. Everything else is just circumstances. David was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of hope. In the Explorer, Marcus stirred, waking to another day of pretending everything was normal at school while his life was anything but. There are things, David said slowly, about my service. Things that make traditional employment complicated. PTSD. Among other things. I have bad days. Days where I can't function the way employers expect. But you functioned yesterday when it mattered. That was different. That was clear. Right and wrong, protect and serve. Civilian life is, he struggled for words, murky. Rachel thought about her own struggles with the murkiness, the politics of policing, the compromise and frustration, the gap between what she'd hoped to be and what the job demanded. What if, she said carefully, we could find you something clear, something that uses what you're good at? Like what? She thought about yesterday, his observation skills, his ability to see what others missed, his instinct to protect. The department has civilian positions, community liaison, youth programs, things where your experience would be an asset, not a liability. They don't hire homeless veterans with PTSD for those jobs. They don't know what I know. They didn't see what I saw. Rachel pulled out her phone, showed him an email she'd drafted at 4 a.m. to her sergeant. A recommendation so strong it bordered on demanded. I've got 3 years of perfect record. Never asked for anything. Never pushed. That currency spends if you use it right. Why? David asked the same question she'd asked him yesterday. Because that's what you do. She echoed his words back. You see someone in trouble, you help. Marcus appeared in the Explorer's window, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He saw his father talking to Rachel and smiled a child's smile, trusting and innocent despite everything. Hi, Officer Rachel, he called out. Hey, Marcus, how'd the homework go? Got it all done. We're studying the Revolutionary War. Did you know George Washington's troops went the whole winter at Valley Forge with barely any food or shoes, but they didn't give up? Rachel looked at David, saw him seeing her understand. The parallel wasn't lost on any of them. Your dad's a hero, she told Marcus. He saved me yesterday. Marcus nodded matter-of-factly. He does that. He saved a lady from a fire once and stopped a man from hitting his kid at the park. And, Marcus, David said, gently embarrassed. It's true, the boy insisted with 8-year-old certainty. Rachel made a decision, the kind that changes lives, hers, theirs, maybe others down the line. Marcus, how would you like to see your dad get a medal? The boy's eyes widened. David immediately shook his head. No attention. We can't. Trust me, Rachel said. I know how to do this right. Quiet ceremony, no media, just the department recognizing what you did. But more importantly, it creates a record. A formal acknowledgement that you're one of the good guys. That matters when you're applying for jobs, for housing, for everything. She's right, Dad, Marcus said quietly. You always tell me to be proud of doing the right thing. David looked between his son and Rachel, caught between pride and survival instinct, between staying invisible and stepping into the light. One condition, he said finally. Name it. This isn't charity. I work for anything I get. I pay back every kindness. That's how we maintain dignity. Rachel extended her hand. Deal. They shook on it there in the parking lot as the sun climbed higher, as the city woke around them, as life prepared to change in ways none of them could fully anticipate. Over the next weeks, Rachel learned what real police work looked like. Not the arrests and reports, but the human connections that actually made communities safer. She vouched for David at the VA, navigated the bureaucracy with the determination of someone who'd seen too clearly what happened when the system failed. She convinced her sergeant to interview David for a civilian position part-time, at first working with at-risk youth. Who better to reach kids on the edge than someone who'd been over it and climbed back? The spare bedroom in her apartment became Marcus's first stable home in 2 years. The boy bloomed like a plant, finally given sunlight, his grades soaring even higher, his smile appearing more often. Scout patrolled the apartment like she'd always belonged there, splitting her time between guarding Marcus while he studied and sitting with David on the bad nights when the war came back uninvited. David struggled at first with accepting help with being seen, with trusting that this wasn't temporary. But gradually, incrementally, he began to rebuild. The part-time position became full-time. The VA finally came through with proper treatment. The nightmares decreased, though they never fully disappeared. Some wounds never completely heal. They just become part of who you are. 3 months after that night in the rain, David stood in the community center teaching a group of teenagers basic self-defense. Half of them had records. Most had stories that would break hearts. All of them listened when he talked because he didn't talk down to them. He knew their struggles weren't abstract. He'd lived versions of them. The thing about rock bottom, he told them, demonstrating a defensive stance, is that it's solid. You can build from there, but you got to be willing to see the people reaching down to help you up. And more importantly, once you're up, you got to reach back for the next person. Rachel watched from the doorway, still in uniform, just off shift. She'd made this her regular stop, checking in on the program, on David, on the kids who were starting to trust that maybe the system could include people who actually cared. After class, as the teenagers filed out, some nodding respect to Rachel, a few actually making eye contact, David approached her. "Thank you," he said, as he did every time they met. "Stop thanking me," she replied, as she always did. "You saved my life." "You saved mine," he countered, "and Marcus's. Then we're even." David smiled, that expression that still transformed his face, showing the man he was becoming again, or maybe for the first time, without the weight of war or loss or survival crushing him down. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said, gesturing to a woman sitting in the corner with a young child. "Sarah and her daughter. They're living in their car. Sound familiar?" Rachel looked at the woman, young, tired, holding herself with the kind of rigid control that suggested pride was all she had left. The child may be 5, coloring intently in a worn notebook. "You vouching for her?" Rachel asked. "She's good people. Just had bad circumstances pile up. Lost her job when the factory closed. Couldn't make rent. Been keeping it together for 6 months, but winter's coming." Winter. Rachel remembered David's stories about last winter, the constant cold, the struggle to keep Marcus warm, the fear that child services would take his son if anyone noticed their situation. "You have a plan?" David nodded. "There's a maintenance position opening at the shelter on 5th. I know the manager. He'll hire her if someone vouches. She's handy, knows electrical and plumbing. Her dad was a contractor, taught her the trades. And housing. That's where I was hoping you might help. You know landlords now, people who trust your word." Rachel did know landlords now. In 3 months, she'd built a network of people willing to take chances on her recommendations. Not charity, but calculated risks backed by her reputation, and when necessary, her unofficial guarantee that problems wouldn't become police problems. "I'll make some calls," she said. "I knew you would." David paused, then added, "She reminds me of something you said that first morning, about seeing the city for the first time, really seeing it." "Yeah. There are thousands of us. Invisible people, living in cars and shelters on the streets. Most of us aren't addicts or criminals. We're just people who fell through cracks that kept getting wider. A medical bill, a factory closing, a war that followed us home. And once you fall, climbing back up alone is almost impossible." Rachel thought about her safe life, how thin the margins really were. One injury, one job loss, one bad break, and anyone could be David or Sarah or the thousands of others trying to stay invisible while maintaining dignity. "So we make ladders," she said. "One rung at a time. One person at a time," David agreed. That night, Rachel had dinner with David and Marcus in the apartment that had become their home. Marcus excitedly showed her his science project, a model of a bridge designed to hold maximum weight with minimum materials. The metaphor wasn't lost on any of them. Engineering, Marcus explained eagerly, is about finding the strongest structure with what you have available. You can't always have the best materials, but you can always find the best design. Scout lay at their feet, content in the way of dogs who know their pack is safe. Outside, rain began to fall again, but inside was warm and dry and stable. "I've been thinking," David said as they cleared the dishes, "about that night, about why I was there in that exact spot at that exact moment." "Fate," Rachel suggested, half joking. "Purpose," David corrected. "For 2 years I thought I'd lost mine. Thought I was just existing, keeping Marcus fed and safe, but not really living. Then I saw you that night and I knew, clear as I've ever known anything. This was why I was there. All of it, the loss, the struggle, the invisibility, it put me in position to help when it mattered." "You would have helped anyone." "Maybe, but it wasn't anyone. It was you, someone who could help others, who would help others." That multiplies the good, doesn't it? Rachel thought about Sarah and her daughter, about the teenagers in David's class, about the ripples spreading out from one moment of courage in the rain. "Yeah," she said, "it does." Later, after Marcus had gone to bed and David had retreated to his room to wage his nightly battle with memories, Rachel stood at her window, watching the rain. The city spread out below millions of lights, hiding millions of stories. How many invisible people were out there? How many potential heroes dismissed as problems? How many David Chens waiting for someone to truly see them? Her phone buzzed. Text from dispatch about a homeless veteran causing a disturbance at a convenience store. 2 years ago, 3 months ago, she would have responded by the book. Arrest if necessary, move along if not maintain order above all. Now she texted back, "On my way, I'll handle it." Because handling it meant something different now. It meant seeing the person, not just the problem. It meant understanding that sometimes disturbing the peace was the only way to be heard. It meant remembering that everyone was one bad day, one missed payment, one closed factory away from invisibility. She grabbed her keys, her badge, and something more, the knowledge that real protection and service happened in the margins, in the shadows, in the spaces where official policy ended and humanity began. The rain intensified as she drove toward the disturbance, but she didn't mind. Rain had brought David into her life, had washed away her safe assumptions and comfortable blindness. Now every drop reminded her of that night, of the courage, of the invisible, of the thin line between saved and lost. The convenience store came into view, its neon glow harsh against the darkness. A man stood outside, agitated, arguing with the clerk through the door. Other units would arrive soon, ready to arrest or forcibly remove. But Rachel got there first, approaching slowly, hands visible, voice calm. "Hey there," she said. "Rough night." The man turned, ready to fight or flee, then saw something in her face, recognition maybe, or just the absence of judgment. "They won't let me buy food," he said. "I got money, I showed them. But they said I smell bad, that I'm scaring customers." Rachel looked at the clerk through the window, young and frightened, probably told to keep the homeless away by a manager safe in suburbia. "Wait here," she told the veteran. She entered the store, had a quiet conversation with the clerk, explained that refusing service to someone with money was discrimination, that this man had served his country, that compassion cost nothing but paid dividends in community safety. 5 minutes later, the veteran had his food. As he left, he stopped beside Rachel's patrol car. "You're different," he said. "I learned from someone that you see someone in trouble, you help," she replied. Simple as that. Simple as that. But it wasn't simple, not really. It was hard and complicated and sometimes heartbreaking. It meant fighting the system from inside while trying not to let it corrupt the impulse to help. It meant seeing too much suffering and not being able to fix it all. It meant carrying stories like David's and Sarah's and this veteran's, knowing that for everyone she helped, dozens remained invisible. But it was also necessary as David's tackle in the rain, as necessary as Scout's loyal protection, as necessary as Marcus's determination to excel despite everything. Because courage wasn't just about the dramatic moments, the knife fights, and heroic interventions. Real courage was quieter, steadier. It was David getting up each day to face his demons while raising his son. It was Sarah keeping her dignity while living in a car. It was Marcus doing homework by flashlight without complaint. It was Rachel choosing to see what was easier to ignore. The rain continued as she drove home, but the city looked different now, not darker but more complex, full of hidden stories and invisible heroes of people one paycheck or one kindness away from completely different lives. She thought about her old partner who'd quit the force, said he couldn't take seeing the worst of people every day. But that wasn't what she saw anymore. She saw the best of people in the worst circumstances. She saw courage that didn't wear uniforms or carry badges. She saw humanity persisting despite systems designed to grind it down. Her phone rang. David. "Sarah got the job," he said without preamble. "Starts Monday." "That's great. What about housing?" "Working on it. But she's got hope now. That's everything." Hope. Such a small word for such a powerful force. The difference between existing and living, between invisible and seen, between falling and flying. "You did good," Rachel told him. "We did good," he corrected. "That's how it works. No one climbs alone." After they hung up, Rachel thought about that phrase, "no one climbs alone." It was the opposite of everything she'd been taught professionally and personally. Self-reliance, independence, standing on your own 2 feet. These were the virtues her culture celebrated. But David had shown her something different. Interdependence. Community. The radical act of accepting help and offering it in return. 3 months had passed since that night in the rain, but in many ways it was still happening. Every day brought new challenges, new invisible people becoming visible, new opportunities to choose between safety and service. The knife-wielding attacker was in prison, but the real danger, the indifference that let people fall through cracks, that was the ongoing threat Rachel now fought. She pulled into her apartment complex, noting David's light was still on. Probably reviewing job applications for the youth program, looking for kids everyone else had written off. He had an eye for potential that others missed, probably because he knew what it felt like to be dismissed. Inside, she found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by files scattered at his feet. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Sarah's daughter, Lily. She hasn't talked since they lost their home. Selective mutism, the shelter psychologist says. Trauma response." "That's rough." "Marcus wants to help. He remembers not talking for a while after his mom died. Thinks maybe he could, I don't know, be a friend." "Show her it gets better." Rachel poured herself coffee, joining him at the table. This had become their routine late-night strategy sessions about healing a broken world one person at a time. "Let him try," she said. "Kids sometimes reach kids better than adults can." "Yeah." David rubbed his eyes, exhaustion showing. "Some days I wonder if we're making any real difference. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. But every spoonful matters to someone drowning." He looked at her, that penetrating gaze that had first warned her of danger, now seeing something else. "You've changed," he said. "So have you." "No, I mean, when we met you were going through the motions, safe. Now you're—" He searched for words, alive, present, engaged. Rachel thought about her life before the empty apartment, the safe routines, the job that was just a job. Now every day had purpose beyond procedure. Every call was a chance to truly protect and serve. "You saved more than my life that night," she admitted. "You saved me from a different kind of invisibility, the kind where you exist but don't really live." David nodded, understanding without explanation. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found purpose in each other's rescue. A soft knock interrupted them. Marcus stood in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Dad, I had the dream again." David immediately rose, but Marcus shook his head. "Not the bad one. The good one. Where we have a home and Scout has a yard and you smile all the time." "That's not a dream anymore, buddy," David said softly. "I know. That's what makes it good." The boy padded back to bed, Scout following protectively. David watched them go, love and pain mixing on his face. "He's everything," he said simply. "He's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him. He kept me human when it would have been easier to become something else. Someone else. The kind of person who survives but doesn't live." Rachel understood. The job could do that, make you hard, cynical, closed off. But David and Marcus, and now Sarah and all the others, they kept her human too. Reminded her why the work mattered. "I should try to sleep," David said, but didn't move. "Bad night." Anniversary, 5 years since Afghanistan, the thing that ended my military career. He'd never talked about it directly. Rachel didn't push, just waited. Convoy hit an IED, lost 3 men, good men. I was supposed to... I should have seen it, should have known. All my observation skills, all my training, and I missed it. David. I know, survivor's guilt, PTSD. I've heard all the terms, but knowing what to call it doesn't make it go away. Those men had families, kids. They're gone, and I'm here, and some days I don't know why. Because of Marcus, because of Sarah, because of me, because of everyone you've helped and will help. Is it enough to balance the scales? Rachel thought carefully before answering. There are no scales. There's just what happened and what happens next. You can't save the men you lost, but you can honor them by saving others, by living with purpose, by teaching Marcus that good men don't give up especially when it's hard. David finally looked at her, really looked at her. How'd you get so wise? I had a good teacher, this homeless guy who lived in his car, real philosopher type. That earned her a small smile. Sounds like a troublemaker. The best kind. They sat there until dawn talking about everything and nothing about the people they'd been and were becoming about the city's invisible population and their visible dreams. When the sun finally rose, painting the apartment in golden light, David stood to make breakfast for Marcus. Thank you, he said as always. Stop thanking me, she replied, as always. But this time he shook his head. No, gratitude matters. It's what separates surviving from living. Being thankful means you recognize good in the world even when bad seems overwhelming. He was right, Rachel realized. Gratitude was a choice like courage, like seeing the invisible, like helping when it would be easier to walk away. Marcus emerged dressed for school, backpack ready. He hugged his father, then surprised Rachel with a hug too. Thanks for letting us stay, he said with 8-year-old sincerity. Thanks for making it home, she replied. As they prepared for their day, David to the community center, Rachel to her shift, Marcus to school, the apartment filled with the comfortable chaos of family. Not traditional family maybe, but real nonetheless. Forged in crisis, strengthened by choice, held together by something more powerful than blood or law. Before leaving, Rachel checked her phone. 3 messages about homeless individuals causing problems. Once she would have seen only the problems. Now she saw the people. Each call was an opportunity to connect, to redirect, to possibly save someone the way David had saved her. Be safe out there, David called as she headed to the door. Always am, she replied, then added, now. Because now she understood what safety really meant. It wasn't about avoiding danger, it was about facing it with backup, with community, with people who'd catch you if you fell. Real safety came from knowing you weren't alone, that invisible threads connected you to others who'd stand in the rain and fight for strangers. The city waited outside, full of its usual chaos and occasional miracles. Rachel adjusted her badge, checked her weapon, and stepped into it. Ready to serve and protect in ways the Academy never taught, but David had demonstrated. Ready to see the invisible and make them matter. The warehouse district at dawn looked like a mouthful of broken teeth, each abandoned building a gap where commerce used to thrive. Rachel's patrol car moved slowly through the maze of empty loading docks and rusted fire escapes, her radio crackling with routine checks from other units. 6 months had passed since that night in the rain, since David Chen had changed the trajectory of her life, and now she saw these forgotten spaces differently, not as areas to avoid or quickly patrol through, but as potential shelters for the invisible, the places where people like David once sought refuge from judgment and cold. Unit 7-4. We've got a 1054 at the old Brennan Textile Building, dispatch called. Possible deceased called in by urban explorers. Rachel's stomach tightened. 1054 dead body. In places like this, it usually meant someone homeless had died alone, frozen or sick, or simply given up. She grabbed her radio. Unit 7-4 responding. ETA 3 minutes. The Brennan Building stood 7 stories of industrial decay, its windows mostly shattered walls tagged with graffiti that told stories of territory and survival. 2 teenagers waited by a gap in the chain-link fence their expensive cameras and urban exploration gear marking them as thrill seekers who'd found more than Instagram content. "Third floor," one of them said, pale and shaken. "We were just taking pictures. We didn't touch anything." Rachel called for backup, and the coroner then entered the building. The stairs creaked under her weight, each step echoing in the vast emptiness. The third floor opened into a massive space that once housed textile looms, now home to pigeons and decay. In the far corner beneath a relatively intact section of roof, she found him. Not deceased, not yet, but close. An elderly black man, maybe 70, wrapped in layers of threadbare blankets, his breath coming in rattles that spoke of pneumonia or worse. His eyes flickered open as she approached, confused and fever-bright. "Sir, I'm Officer Turner. I'm here to help." "What's your name?" His lips moved no sound at first, then barely a whisper. William Foster." Rachel immediately called for paramedics, upgrading the call from deceased to critical medical. While waiting, she knelt beside William, checking his pulse, weak but steady. His belongings were meager but organized, a Bible held together with rubber bands, a folder of documents in a plastic bag, a photograph of a woman and 2 children protected in a Ziploc bag. "My papers," William managed, gesturing weakly at the folder. "Important." Rachel opened it carefully. Inside were military discharge papers from Vietnam, a Bronze Star citation, Social Security documents, and surprisingly deed papers for a house on Maple Street dated 1975. "You own a house?" she asked gently. William's eyes filled with tears. "Lost it. Reverse mortgage. They said I could stay, but then the bank... My daughter, she tried to help, but..." The story came in fragments as they waited for the ambulance. William had owned his home free and clear until his wife got cancer. Medical bills mounted. A reverse mortgage seemed like salvation access his home's equity to pay for treatment. But after his wife died, the terms became predatory. Missed payments during his grief led to foreclosure. His daughter lived in Seattle, had tried to help, but she had her own struggles. Pride kept him from telling her he was on the streets. 2 years, he whispered. 2 years out here, invisible. The paramedics arrived, stabilizing William, preparing him for transport. As they lifted him onto the gurney, he grabbed Rachel's hand with surprising strength. "My things, please." "I'll keep them safe," she promised, gathering his few possessions. At the hospital, Rachel stayed while doctors worked on William. Severe pneumonia, malnutrition, dehydration, a constellation of conditions that killed homeless elderly every winter. But William was a fighter, the doctor said, military tough. He might make it. Rachel called David from the waiting room. "I need your help." "What's wrong?" She explained about William, about the house, about the daughter who didn't know her father was dying on the streets of the city where he'd once owned property. "I'll find the daughter," David said immediately. "What's her name?" Rachel checked William's documents. "Angela Foster Mills, Seattle area." "On it. How bad is he?" "Bad, but fighting." "Marines don't quit," David said quietly. "Neither do we." While David worked his networks, he'd become surprisingly good at finding people using skills from his intelligence days. Rachel dove into William's case. The reverse mortgage company Equity Solutions Inc. had a reputation. Dozens of complaints, particularly targeting elderly veterans. Legal, but predatory, operating in the gray spaces where ethics went to die. Her sergeant found her in the hospital cafeteria at shift change, still in uniform, surrounded by paperwork. "Heard you found another project," Sergeant Mills said, not unkindly. Since David's commendation ceremony, Mills had become more supportive of what he called Rachel's humanitarian tangents. He served in Vietnam, has a Bronze Star, lost his house to predatory lending. Now he's dying of pneumonia he caught sleeping in an abandoned building. Mills sat down, his expression hardening. "Equity Solutions. You know them." "My uncle almost lost his place to them. Bastards are legal vampires." He paused. "What do you need?" "Time, resources, maybe legal help." "The department has that new partnership with the Veterans Legal Alliance. I'll make a call." This was new Mills actively helping rather than just tolerating her efforts. The change had been gradual but real, spreading through the department as success stories accumulated. David's youth program had cut juvenile recidivism by 30%. 3 of Rachel's homeless contacts had become informal community watchers, preventing 2 robberies and finding a missing child. The invisible were becoming visible and, more importantly, valuable. David called back an hour later. Found her. Angela's a nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital. Single mom, 2 kids. She's been sending money to what she thought was her father's apartment. Someone's been cashing the checks. Jesus. Gets worse. She thinks he's angry at her, won't return calls. Doesn't know the apartment building was demolished 8 months ago. Can you... Already called her. She's on a flight tonight. Should be there by 10. Rachel felt the familiar surge of possibility, the feeling that maybe this time they could unbreak something broken. You're amazing. I'm motivated, David corrected. Every elderly veteran on the streets could be me in 30 years if things had gone differently. William stabilized over the next 12 hours, antibiotics fighting the infection fluids, restoring some strength. When he woke fully, Rachel was there with good news. Angela's coming, she said simply. The old man's face crumbled. She can't see me like this. I was supposed to be... You're her father. That's all that matters. I was somebody once, William said, looking at his hands scarred from textile work after the war, now thin and trembling. Had a home, a job, dignity. You're still somebody. You're William Foster, Vietnam veteran, Bronze Star recipient, father, grandfather, survivor. Survivor. He tested the word. That all that's left. Rachel thought of David, of Sarah, of all the invisible people she'd met. Surviving is the first step. Then comes living again. Angela arrived that night rushing into the hospital room with 6 months of guilt and 2 years of misdirected anger. The reunion was tearful, complicated, full of explanations and apologies. Rachel stepped out to give them privacy, finding David in the waiting room with Marcus and Scout. Thought you might need backup, David said. Marcus held a get well card he'd made addressed to Mr. Foster, American Hero. The boy's empathy never ceased to amaze Rachel, perhaps, because he knew what it felt like to have a father struggling with dignity. Can we see him? Marcus asked. Let's give him time with his daughter first. They waited, this unusual family forged by circumstance and choice. Around them, the hospital hummed with its usual drama, lives ending and beginning, suffering and healing, the whole human experience compressed into fluorescent lit corridors. Angela emerged after an hour, eyes red but determined. She looked at the small group without surprise, somehow knowing these were her father's advocates. He told me what you did, she said to Rachel. Thank you. I just called for help. No, before that. You saw him. Most cops would have just called the coroner and moved on. You saw him as a person. David stepped forward. Ma'am, I run a program for veterans in crisis. We have resources, temporary housing, legal aid. Your father doesn't have to go back to the streets. He's coming home with me, Angela said firmly. To Seattle. Should have happened 2 years ago, but he was too proud and I was too hurt to push past it. The house, Rachel said. The reverse mortgage. There might be legal remedies. Predatory lending targeting veterans, judges don't like that. Angela's expression hardened. They stole his home. The home he bought with my mother where I grew up, where my kids should have been able to visit their grandfather. We know lawyers, David said quietly. Good ones, angry ones, the kind who take cases like this personally. Within a week, William's case had become a cause. The Veterans Legal Alliance took it pro bono, discovering in the process that Equity Solutions had violated numerous regulations in their handling of William's mortgage. The local news picked up the story, elderly black veteran Bronze Star recipient lost home to predatory lending, nearly died on the streets. The optics were terrible for Equity Solutions, but Rachel had learned that public shaming only went so far. Real change required systematic pressure. She worked with David and the legal team, identifying 17 other elderly veterans who'd lost homes to the same company. They organized them, creating a class action potential that made Equity Solutions lawyers nervous. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus, doing research for a school project on community heroes, had been reading through William's military citations. He found something everyone else had missed. William had saved the life of a lieutenant in Vietnam, pulling him from a burning helicopter. That lieutenant was now Senator James Crawford, chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. "We should write to him," Marcus suggested with the simple clarity of childhood. David looked at Rachel. "Kid's got a point." The letter Marcus wrote with David's help was devastating in its simplicity. A child writing about meeting Mr. Foster, about how heroes shouldn't die alone in abandoned buildings, about how America's promise to its veterans seemed broken but could be fixed. Senator Crawford's response came within 48 hours. Not a form letter, but a personal call to David's cell phone. "I remember William Foster," the senator said. "He carried me 3 miles through jungle with 2 bullets in his shoulder. I owe him my life. What do you need?" What they needed was leverage, and Crawford provided it. Federal investigation into equity solutions. Congressional hearing on predatory lending targeting veterans. Media attention that went national. 3 months later, William stood in his old house on Maple Street, keys in hand. The legal settlement had not only returned the property, but paid damages. The house needed work years of neglect showed, but it was his again. "I want to make it a transitional home," William announced, surprising everyone. "For veterans getting back on their feet. Angela's helping me set up a nonprofit, Foster House." Rachel watched David's reaction, the recognition of another invisible person choosing to become a ladder for others to climb. The renovation became a community project. David's youth program kids helped with painting and landscaping, learning construction skills and history from William's stories. Sarah, now stable in her maintenance job and apartment organized, donated furniture and supplies. Marcus designed a garden plan for the backyard, vegetables for the residents, flowers for beauty, because both were necessary. Officer Turner became a regular presence, not as law enforcement, but as friend and advocate. She'd learned to navigate between her official role and her unofficial mission, using her position to open doors while keeping her heart open to the stories behind the statistics. One evening, as they worked on installing new windows in Foster House, William pulled Rachel aside. "That day in the warehouse, I was ready to let go," he admitted. "Tired of fighting, tired of being invisible, tired of remembering when I mattered." "You always mattered." "No, I was disappeared. You know what that's like. To walk down streets you helped build and have people look through you. To have your whole life erased because you can't pay bills." Rachel thought of David's words about invisibility, about the thousands of Williams in every city disappeared by circumstance and systems that valued property over people. "But you saw me," William continued, "and that young man David, he found my daughter. And now," he gestured at the house coming back to life, "now I get to be the one seeing others." The first resident of Foster House was James, a Gulf War veteran David had met at the VA. Substance abuse issues under control but requiring support. The second was Maria, a female veteran with 2 teenagers escaping domestic violence. The third was Charles, Vietnam era, like William, artist and philosopher, who'd chosen streets over shelters because shelters didn't allow him to paint. Each brought their own story, their own skills, their own version of invisible made visible. James was a master carpenter who led the continuing renovation. Maria knew computers set up systems for job searching and benefit applications. Charles painted murals on the walls, scenes of hope and homecoming that transformed the space from house to home. Rachel brought judges and city officials through Foster House, showing them what was possible when systems bent toward justice instead of just order. Some got it immediately. Others required more convincing. But gradually, the model spread. Other cities called, wanting to replicate the program. David became the unofficial liaison between Foster House and his youth program, bringing kids to learn from veterans, creating connections across generations and experiences. His own healing accelerated in the teaching, explaining trauma to teenagers, helped him understand his own, showing them recovery was possible, proved it to himself. One night, 6 months after Foster House opened, they held their first community dinner. The dining room filled with an unlikely assembly. Formerly homeless veterans, at-risk youth, police officers, off-duty social workers. Angela visiting from Seattle with her children, and Marcus presenting his award-winning essay about community heroes. William stood to speak steady, now healthy. His dignity not just restored but transformed into something greater. "They say you can't go home again, Sig," he began. "But that's not true. You can't go back to who you were, but you can go forward to who you're meant to be." This house was where I raised my family, lost my wife, lost myself. Now it's where others find themselves. That's redemption. He looked at Rachel. Officer Turner saved my life, but more than that, she saved my purpose. Showed me that falling down doesn't mean staying down, that invisible doesn't mean insignificant. Rachel felt tears she didn't try to hide. This was what she'd joined the force to do, even if she hadn't known it at the time. Not just arrest criminals, but arrest the fall of good people. Not just protect property, but protect potential. After dinner, as people mingled and Marcus taught William's grandchildren a card game, David found Rachel on the back porch. Scout lay between them, content in the way of dogs who sense their pack is whole. "Remember that night in the rain?" David asked. "Every day. I've been thinking about what you said about me saving your life. But the truth is we saved each other. You from a life of safe blindness, me from invisible despair. And now," David gestured through the window at the warm scene inside veterans and youth official and unofficial helpers, all connected by threads of compassion and shared humanity. "Now we're saving others, teaching them to save each other, creating a different kind of safety net, one made of people who see each other, really see each other." Rachel's radio crackled a call about a disturbance at a homeless camp near the river. Once she would have responded with backup and citations. Now she responded with knowledge and alternatives. "I should take this," she said. "Want company." She looked at David, no longer the desperate father from that night in the rain, but not fully free of those shadows either. None of them were. They'd just learned to use their shadows to provide shade for others. "Always," she said. They drove toward the river Scout in the back seat, rain beginning to fall again. But this time the rain didn't feel like danger. It felt like possibility, washing clean, nurturing growth, connecting sky to earth, to river to sea, all water eventually finding its way home. The camp appeared in their headlights, a collection of tents and tarps that represented both failure and resilience. The disturbance turned out to be a dispute over space, the kind of conflict that arose when too many people competed for too little safety. Rachel approached not with authority, but with David's presence and a simple question: how can we help? The conversation that followed was complicated, involving territorial disputes and stolen belongings and mental health crises. But underneath was the same theme: people who'd become invisible to society, still trying to maintain visibility to each other, to matter in whatever small way they could. "Foster House has emergency beds," David offered. "Not permanent, but enough to get through the storm." Some accepted, others didn't, too broken or proud or afraid to trust. But seeds were planted. Word would spread that the cop and the formerly homeless vet were real allies, that Foster House was real sanctuary, that invisible didn't mean forgotten. Driving back, Rachel thought about the journey from that night 6 months ago to now. Not just her journey or David's, but William's, Sarah's, Marcus's, Angela's. All of them connected by choices to see and be seen, to help and accept help. "We're not solving homelessness," David said, reading her thoughts, as he often did now. "We're not changing the system overnight. But we're changing something. Everything changes when you change how you see. When you recognize that the person in crisis could be you with different circumstances. When you understand that helping others helps yourself, that community isn't about proximity, but about purpose." They arrived back at Foster House to find William teaching Charles chess, while Maria helped Marcus with algebra and James fixed a leaky faucet. Angela's children played with Scout in the yard despite the light rain. Sarah had arrived with her daughter Lily, who still didn't speak but smiled now, especially around Marcus, who understood silence. This was the real victory. Not the dramatic rescue in the rain, not the legal triumph over predatory lenders, not even the successful establishment of Foster House. The real victory was this quiet evening of connection of broken people, helping other broken people become whole, or at least more whole than they were alone. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband, reaching out after months of silence, saying he'd heard about her work, that he was proud of her, that maybe they could talk. She deleted it without response. That life-safe, conventional blind belonged to someone she used to be. The person she was now had different definitions of family success and love. "You good?" David asked, noticing her phone. "Better than good. Home." Because home wasn't just a place, but a purpose. Not just shelter, but sanctuary, not just safety, but the courage to risk that safety for others. Home was William's recovered house becoming foster house. Home was David's car becoming Rachel's spare room, becoming a real home. Home was invisible, people becoming visible, becoming vital, becoming family. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof of Foster House like applause from heaven. Inside, warm and dry, and together the formerly invisible continued their quiet revolution, one meal, one conversation, one connection at a time. They were writing new stories over old pain, creating beauty from brokenness, proving that redemption wasn't just possible, but perpetual, always available to those brave enough to see and be seen. As the evening deepened, Rachel helped serve second helpings of James's surprisingly good chili, while David led a discussion about job interview skills and William dozed in his chair, peaceful in his own home again. Marcus and Lily worked on a puzzle in the corner, comfortable in their shared silence. Sarah and Maria compared notes on surviving single motherhood. Charles sketched them all, capturing the moment in charcoal and possibility. This was what protection and service really looked like. Not just arresting the bad, but amplifying the good. Not just maintaining order, but nurturing justice. Not just managing poverty, but defeating invisibility with the radical act of genuine sight. Rachel caught David's eye across the room, and he smiled, that expression that still transformed his face, but came easier now. They'd found something in each other, and in this work, that neither had expected, not just purpose, but joy. Not the easy joy of comfort, but the hard-won joy of struggle, shared, of falling caught, of invisibility, conquered by community. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More Williams dying in warehouses, more Sarahs living in cars, more Davids choosing between dignity and survival. The system wouldn't change overnight, might never fully change. But tonight in this house, reclaimed from loss, surrounded by people, reclaimed from invisibility, they had something powerful, proof that another way was possible. The rain continued, but inside Foster House, no one was cold, no one was alone, no one was invisible. And in that warmth, that community, that visibility lived the seed of revolution, not the violent kind that destroyed, but the quiet kind that created one, saved life at a time. One opened eye at a time, one foster house at a time, until the city itself would be transformed by the radical idea that everyone mattered. Everyone could be seen, everyone deserved home. The news arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, with Rachel reviewing case files while David prepared breakfast for Marcus. The call came from Sergeant Mills, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Turner, you need to see the news. Channel 7, now." Rachel found the remote, flipping to the local news, where reporter Jennifer Hayes stood in front of Foster House, her perfectly styled hair untouched by the morning wind. Behind her, Rachel could see William on the porch, his face a mask of disbelief and growing fury. "In a shocking revelation," Hayes announced with the practiced gravity of someone who'd never missed a meal, "we've learned that Foster House, the celebrated transitional home for veterans, has been harboring a convicted felon. Our investigation reveals that one of the residents, Charles Brennan, served 8 years in prison for armed robbery. Sources question whether allowing violent criminals to live alongside vulnerable veterans is appropriate, even reckless." David's coffee mug hit the counter hard enough to crack. "How did they—" "Someone leaked it," Rachel said, her mind already racing through possibilities. "Someone who wants Foster House to fail." The phone started ringing immediately. City officials who'd supported them were suddenly unavailable. Donors expressed concerns. The VA wanted an emergency meeting. In 30 seconds of television, months of work began unraveling. Rachel arrived at Foster House to find it surrounded by news vans and protesters. Some held signs reading, "Veterans deserve better," and "No criminals near our kids." Counter-protesters had also gathered Foster House supporters and graduates, holding their own signs, "Second chances save lives," and "Judge actions not passed." Inside, she found controlled chaos. William sat with Charles, who looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. James paced by the window, fists clenched. Maria tried to keep her teenagers from seeing the news. And Marcus, home from school, with a suspicious stomachache, sat beside Charles with fierce 8-year-old loyalty. "I should leave," Charles said quietly. "I won't let my past destroy what you've built." Like hell, William responded. This is your home. You've been nothing but helpful since you arrived. Your past is past. Tell that to them. Charles gestured toward the window where photographers pressed against the glass like vultures sensing carrion. David entered through the back door, having snuck past the media circus. I've been making calls. The leak came from Equity Solutions. They're using this to discredit William, undermine the lawsuit. Bastards, James spat. Charles did his time. Been clean for 5 years. He made a mistake when he was 23 and strung out. He's 46 now. Different person. Rachel's phone buzzed. Text from her sergeant. Chief wants you here. Now. The meeting at the station was brutal. Chief Patricia Coleman, usually supportive, looked exhausted. Rachel, I've been fielding calls all morning. City council members, the mayor's office, community leaders. They're all running scared. From what a man who paid his debt to society and has been exemplary since. From the optics, Veterans Home harboring violent criminals makes everyone who supported it look bad. Makes you look bad. Makes the department look bad. So we abandon them. Let Equity Solutions win. Coleman's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying abandon. I'm saying be smart. Distance yourself temporarily. Let this blow over. With respect, Chief, that's exactly when they need support most. When it's hard. When it costs something. It could cost you your career, Turner. You've been on thin ice before with your unconventional methods. This could break it. Rachel thought of David that night in the rain, throwing himself at an armed attacker. No calculation of personal costs, just recognition of necessary action. Then it breaks. She returned to Foster House to find the situation deteriorating. Someone had thrown a brick through a window. The protesters had grown louder, and Charles sat at the kitchen table writing what looked like a goodbye letter. Don't you dare, Rachel told him. Charles looked up with eyes that had seen too much. Officer Turner, I'm grateful for everything, but I won't be the reason this place fails. These people need Foster House. I'm just one person. You're not just anything, Marcus interrupted, surprising everyone. The boy stood straight, channeling his father's courage. You taught me how to draw. You painted that mural that makes everyone smile. You stayed up with Mr. William when he had nightmares about the war. You're not your worst day. You're all your days, and most of them have been good. The room fell silent. David put his hand on his son's shoulder, pride evident despite the crisis. Charles's eyes filled with tears. Kid's got a point, he said shakily. The kid's right, William declared, and I've got something to say to those reporters. Before anyone could stop him, William walked onto the porch. The media surged forward shouting questions. He raised one hand and something in his bearing, military, dignified, unbowed, quieted them. My name is William Foster. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. I've been awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. I lost my home to predatory lending and nearly died on the streets. This house saved my life. The people in it saved my soul. Charles Brennan is one of those people. Yes, he has a past. We all do. Mine includes killing enemy soldiers who were probably teenagers. Does that make me a violent criminal? Or does context matter? Does growth matter? Does redemption matter? A reporter shouted, but he robbed a liquor store 23 years ago while addicted to drugs after his brother died in Iraq. He served his time, got clean, and has spent 5 years helping others. If we only judge people by their worst moments, then none of us deserve grace. But if we believe in the possibility of change and the power of community to transform lives, then Charles belongs here. We all do. Jennifer Hayes pushed forward. Mr. Foster, aren't you concerned about safety? William's gaze could have cut steel. Ma'am, I've lived with Charles for 4 months. He's taught art to troubled kids, cooked meals for new residents, and painted beauty onto walls that had only known ugliness. The only danger here is from people like you stirring up fear for ratings. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some protesters lowered their signs. Others pressed forward more aggressively. That's when Sarah arrived with her daughter Lily. They pushed through the crowd, Lily clutching something in her small hands. Without hesitation, they climbed the porch steps and stood beside William. Mr. Charles, Lily said, her voice small but clear, the first word she'd spoken in public since losing her home. I made this for you. She held up a drawing, a childish but recognizable portrait of Charles, teaching her to paint both of them smiling. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah found the cameras. My daughter didn't speak for 8 months after we became homeless. Charles's art classes gave her a way to express herself. His patience and kindness helped her find her voice again. That's who Charles is now. That's who deserves to be here. The narrative was shifting. Rachel could feel it, see it, in the way some photographers lowered their cameras, the way some protesters began to look uncomfortable. But Jennifer Hayes wasn't done. What about the victims of his crime? Don't they deserve consideration? It was a fair question, one Rachel had been dreading, but Charles himself answered it, stepping onto the porch with quiet dignity. They do, he said simply. The family that owned that store, the clerk I terrorized, they deserve everything. That's why I send half my disability check to them every month, have for 5 years. It doesn't undo what I did, but it's what I can do. The clerk, Mr. Park, he forgave me, told me to help others the way I wish someone had helped me before I fell so far. That's what I'm trying to do here. David stepped forward, then Scout at his side. I'm David Chen, former Marine. I have killed people. In war, yes, but I've ended lives. Does that make me too dangerous to be around? Or do we recognize that people are complex, that our past actions don't have to define our future ones? James joined them. Former alcoholic, crashed my car drunk, could have killed someone. Should I be exiled forever? Maria stood. Domestic violence survivor. I fought back once hard enough to send him to the hospital. Am I too violent to deserve help? One by one, foster house residents and supporters stood with Charles, not denying his past, but refusing to let it erase his present. The visual was powerful, a community standing together against judgment for the radical idea that people could change. But Equity Solutions had more ammunition. The next morning brought new revelations. Charles had been in 3 fights in prison. Never mind that they were defensive, protecting younger inmates. The headline screamed about a violent pattern. Then came the financial attack. Suddenly, Foster House faced code violations that hadn't existed before. Permit requirements appeared from nowhere. The insurance company threatened to cancel their policy. It was a coordinated assault designed to destroy through bureaucracy what couldn't be destroyed through shame. Rachel worked 18-hour days fighting on multiple fronts. She called in every favor, leveraged every connection. David mobilized his network of veterans and youth. William reached out to Senator Crawford again. But they were losing ground. The breaking point came when Child Protective Services showed up at Rachel's apartment. We've received a complaint, the social worker said, clearly uncomfortable, about a minor living in proximity to a violent felon. Rachel's blood went cold. Marcus doesn't live at Foster House, but he spends significant time there, and his father works with Mr. Brennan. We need to evaluate whether this environment is appropriate for a child. David arrived as they were questioning Marcus. His face was stone, but Rachel saw his hands tremble. The fear of losing his son, the nightmare that haunted every struggling parent, was materializing in their living room. Marcus answered their questions with remarkable composure for an 8-year-old. Mr. Charles is my friend. He's teaching me about perspective in art. Did you know that how you see something depends on where you're standing? Maybe you should try standing somewhere else. The social worker made notes, promised to follow up, and left them in crushing silence. They're going after our son, David said quietly, dangerously. They're using Marcus to break us. Rachel had never seen him this angry. Even that night in the rain, facing an attacker, he'd been controlled. This was different parental fury mixed with veterans' tactical assessment. We can't let them win, she said. We can't let them near Marcus. So we fight smarter. That night they gathered at Foster House resident supporters, and surprisingly 3 people Rachel didn't recognize. Charles stood when they entered, tears streaming down his face. This is Mr. Park, he said, indicating an elderly Korean man. His wife, and their son. They owned the store I robbed. The room held its breath. Mr. Park spoke carefully accented English carrying enormous weight. Charles wrote us letters from prison, every week for 8 years, apologizing, sharing his recovery. We didn't respond at first, too angry, too hurt, but he kept writing. When he got out, he started sending money. Not court-ordered, just because it was right. Mrs. Park picked up the story. We lost the store. Not because of the robbery, but the economy. When Charles heard he sent more, it helped us keep our apartment. Their son, a man about Charles's age, stepped forward. I hated you, he told Charles directly. You traumatized my father, but hate is heavy. Forgiveness is freedom. My parents taught me that. You've shown you've changed. That matters. Mr. Park faced the room. We came because we saw the news. They make Charles sound like a monster, but monsters don't spend years trying to repair harm. Monsters don't teach children art. Monsters don't change. Charles changed. We support him being here. The media explosion that followed shifted everything. The park's forgiveness became the story. Equity Solutions manipulation became obvious. Public opinion swung hard toward Foster House. The code violations disappeared. CPS dropped their investigation. Jennifer Hayes was reassigned after emails surfaced showing she'd been paid by Equity Solutions for consulting. But victory felt hollow to Rachel as she watched David holding Marcus extra tight each night, as she saw Charles flinch whenever someone knocked on the door, as she noticed William's hands shake when he thought no one was looking. They'd won, but the attack had left scars. We need to be stronger, David said one evening as they planned Foster House's expansion. Not just defensively. We need to make it impossible for them to attack us like that again. Rachel understood it wasn't enough to do good work. They needed to be unassailable, their reputation so solid that future attacks would backfire immediately. The solution came from Marcus because of course it did. Why don't we tell everyone stories? Not just when bad things happen, but all the time. So people know who we really are. William loved it. A newsletter, old school, but also online. Regular updates about our residents, our successes, our challenges. Transparency as armor. Charles volunteered to illustrate it. Maria would handle the digital side. James would collect stories. They'd call it Visible, a monthly chronicle of invisible people becoming seen. The first issue featured Charles's journey complete with the park's blessing and a photo of Mr. Park learning to paint in Charles's art class. The second told William's story of loss and recovery. The third introduced James's carpentry program teaching skills to other veterans. But it was the fourth issue that changed everything. It featured a simple story about Marcus and Lily working on homework together at Foster House, two children who'd experienced homelessness finding normal in what others called abnormal. The photo Charles had taken showed them concentrating intensely surrounded by veterans and formerly homeless individuals, all quietly supporting their education. The image went viral. Not sensational, just true. Two kids doing homework in a place that society said should be dangerous, but was actually safer than many traditional homes. The comments poured in from teachers, parents, veterans, social workers, all recognizing something authentic and necessary. Donations increased. Volunteers multiplied. Other cities didn't just call for advice, they sent representatives to learn. Foster House became a model, but more importantly, it became unassailable. Too many people had stake in its success now. 6 months after the attack, they held an open house. 300 people attended. The mayor spoke. Senator Crawford sent a video message. The Parks were guests of honor. But the moment that mattered most to Rachel was when Charles unveiled his newest mural. It covered the entire side of Foster House, a massive tree with roots made of darkness and pain, but branches reaching toward light. In the branches were faces every resident past and present, every supporter, every child who'd found safety there. At the base of the tree, barely visible unless you knew to look, were words, "Growth requires both sun and storm." Jennifer Hayes was there now working for a nonprofit after her journalism career imploded. She approached Rachel tentatively. I wanted to apologize. I was so focused on the story that I forgot about the people. Rachel studied her, seeing ambition curdled into regret. Apology accepted, but learn from it. Every story you tell is about someone's life, someone's family, someone's hope. Treat that with respect. As the event wound down, Rachel found herself on the roof with David watching the sunset paint the city gold. Marcus and Lily played in the garden below, their laughter mixing with conversation from the ongoing celebration. We almost lost everything, David said quietly. But we didn't. Because Charles's victims forgave him, because Marcus spoke up, because 1,000 small graces aligned. It could have gone the other way. Rachel knew he was right. They'd been lucky, but also prepared, also brave, also supported by community they'd built through months of patient work. That's why we keep building, she said. Make the foundation so strong that attacks just reveal the attacker's weakness. David nodded, then surprised her by taking her hand. They'd been dancing around something beyond partnership for months, both too scarred by past relationships to risk new ones. But surviving the attack had clarified things. Rachel, I know, she said. Me too. It wasn't a movie moment. No dramatic kiss or declaration. Just two damaged people recognizing something good and deciding to protect it. Like Foster House itself, not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. Below them, William called everyone together for dinner. The dining room filled with unlikely family former addicts and accomplished professionals, veterans and civilians, children and elders, all connected by the radical act of seeing each other as human. Charles said grace, his voice steady and grateful. For second chances and third ones. For those who see us not as we were, but as we're becoming. For walls that become bridges and strangers who become family. For the courage to be visible, scars and all. Amen. The amens echoed from 24 throats, followed by the comfortable chaos of communal dining. Stories shared, jokes told, plans made. Sarah announced she'd been promoted to head of maintenance at the shelter. James had been hired to teach carpentry at the vocational school. Maria's son had been accepted to college with full scholarship, small victories that added up to revolution. But the biggest change was in the applications. Foster House now received 50 a month. Not just veterans, but their families, friends, fellow survivors. The model was replicating Foster House 2 was already under construction, funded by a combination of government grants, private donations, and surprisingly a settlement from Equity Solutions, who decided fighting Senator Crawford's attention wasn't worth it. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her chief. City Council wants to give you commendation. Ceremony next week. She showed it to David, who smiled. Look at you, from troublemaker to hero. We're all heroes, she corrected. That's the point. As dinner continued below, Rachel thought about the journey from that night in the rain to now. 2 years of transformation, not just for individuals, but for the community itself. The invisible hadn't just become visible. They'd become vital. The city was safer, not because more people were arrested, but because fewer people fell through cracks. David squeezed her hand. What are you thinking? About expansion. Foster houses in every neighborhood, art programs in all of them, job training, childcare. Make the safety net so tight that no one falls through. Ambitious. Necessary. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Dad, Rachel, Mr. William wants you. He has an announcement. They descended to find William standing at the head of the table, Charles beside him, both grinning. We got the grant, William announced. The big one. Federal funding for 10 foster houses nationwide. They want us to train the directors, share our model, spread what we've built. The room erupted in celebration. Maria cried. James pumped his fist. Sarah hugged Lily, who was smiling wider than anyone had ever seen. Charles just stood there, overwhelmed by the journey from condemned criminal to national model creator. But it was Marcus who said what mattered most. We're going to help so many people. Yes, Rachel thought, looking around the room at faces that had gone from desperate to determined, from invisible to invaluable. They were going to help so many people, not through charity, but through community, not through pity, but through recognition of shared humanity. The work would be hard. There would be more attacks, more setbacks, more nights when the weight of need seemed crushing. But there would also be more moments like this victory snatched from defeat. Families forged from strangers, hope built from hopelessness. Outside, night fell on the city, but inside Foster House, light blazed. Not just electrical, but emotional, spiritual. The light of people who'd walked through darkness and chosen to become torches for others. The revolution they'd started with one saved life in the rain had become a movement, quiet but unstoppable, spreading one foster house at a time. Tomorrow, they'd start planning the expansion. Tonight, they celebrated survival and transformation. The extraordinary, ordinary people who'd refused to remain invisible, who demanded to be seen and in being seen, had changed how the entire city saw itself. Rachel caught Charles adding finishing touches to his mural by floodlight, adding one more face to the tree Jennifer Hayes painted small but present, because even those who'd attacked them could be redeemed, could become part of the story of growth and grace. That was the real revolution, not destroying enemies, but transforming them into allies. Not winning through force, but through the irresistible power of visible humanity. It had started with David saving Rachel in the rain. It would continue as long as people chose to see each other, really, see each other and recognize that everyone deserved the chance. Charles had been given the chance, they'd all been given the chance to become more than their worst moment, more than their circumstances, more than invisible. The Foster house stood strong against the nightlights burning in every window, a beacon for the lost and a fortress for the found, proof that sometimes the best defense against darkness was simply powerfully to shine. The letter arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday morning, 3 years after that first night when David had saved Rachel's life. Marcus found it sliding under their apartment door, no postmark, no return address, just Rachel's name written in careful script. Inside a single paragraph that changed everything. Officer Turner, you don't know me, but I know what you've done. Foster House saved my brother's life. Now I need your help. There's something happening you need to see. Tomorrow 2 a.m., the abandoned Riverside factory. Come alone. Trust me like my brother trusted you. A friend who sees what others miss. Rachel showed it to David immediately. His tactical mind went to work analyzing threats, considering possibilities. It could be a trap. Equity Solutions still has grudges, or someone else we've crossed. Or it could be someone who needs help. You can't go alone. The letter says, I don't care what it says. David's voice carried the edge it got when Marcus was threatened when family was at risk. Because that's what they'd become, family. Not officially, not legally, but in every way that mattered. I'm coming with you. Rachel knew better than to argue when he used that tone. They'd learned to read each other's limits over the years, to know when to push and when to accept. This was acceptance time. The Riverside factory loomed against the night sky like a rotting tooth, 6 stories of broken windows and rusted fire escapes. Once it had employed 3,000 people manufacturing textiles that clothed half the state. Now it sheltered rats and rumors, the kind of place where people disappeared and nobody asked questions. David parked 3 blocks away, approached from the south, while Rachel took the main entrance. They'd done this dance before him as invisible backup, her as visible presence. Their earpieces crackled with shared breath as they entered the darkness. Second floor, David whispered. Movement. Rachel climbed the stairs, each step echoing despite her efforts at silence. The second floor opened into a vast space, machinery shadows creating a forest of metal and memory. At the far end, a figure stood backlit by a camping lantern, young, maybe 25, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that couldn't hide the military bearing. Female Rachel realized as she got closer with eyes that had seen too much too young. Officer Turner, thank you for coming. The woman's voice was steady but strained. My name is Jessica Martinez. My brother Tony lives at Foster House. You helped him after he got back from Afghanistan. Rachel remembered Tony's severe PTSD, traumatic brain injury, suicide attempts. Foster House had been his last chance, and it had worked. 6 months of patient support, Charles's art therapy. William's veteran wisdom, and Tony had stabilized. Last she'd heard, he was working construction and dating a nurse from the VA. Tony's doing well, Rachel said carefully, because of you, because of Foster House. Jessica pulled back her hood, revealing close-cropped hair and a bruise fading on her left cheek. That's why I'm here. There are others who need what Tony got, but they can't come forward, not officially. Why not? Jessica glanced around nervously. Because they're not supposed to exist. Before Rachel could respond, footsteps echoed through the factory. Not David's careful movement, multiple people moving with purpose. Jessica's hand went to her waistband where Rachel glimpsed a pistol. Did you set me up? Rachel's hand found her own weapon. No, they must have followed you. Or me. Damn it! Jessica grabbed the lantern, smashing it against the ground, plunging them into darkness. This way! Quick! They ran through the maze of machinery, Jessica leading with surprising confidence. Behind them, voices shouted, flashlight beams swept the space. Rachel's earpiece crackled, David reporting 4 hostiles, maybe more, converging on their position. A door appeared in the darkness. Jessica yanked it open, revealing stairs going down. Underground tunnels. They connect to the storm system. Rachel hesitated. Following an armed stranger into underground tunnels violated every protocol, but something in Jessica's desperation, her genuine fear, made the decision. They descended into darkness that smelled of rust and decay. The tunnel stretched ahead, barely tall enough to stand upright. Water dripped steadily and things scurried away from their footsteps. "David going underground," Rachel whispered into her mic. "Southeast corner service tunnel." "Copy. Circling back. Watch your six." They moved quickly through the tunnels, Jessica navigating turns without hesitation. After 10 minutes that felt like hours, she stopped at a section where the tunnel widened. A grate overhead let in streetlight. Safe enough to talk. "Explain," Rachel demanded. "Who are those people? What doesn't exist?" Jessica sat heavily against the tunnel wall, exhaustion showing. Black sites. Off-the-books operations. Some military, some contractors, some nobody claims. People like my brother weren't the only ones broken by war. Some got broken by what they were ordered to do after. Things that officially never happened. Rachel felt cold that had nothing to do with the tunnel. "You're talking about veterans who can't get help because their service doesn't exist on paper. Men and women who did terrible things under orders and now can't live with it. But they can't go to the VA because their records are sealed or destroyed. Can't get therapy because they can't talk about what happened. They're killing themselves, Officer Turner. One by one in silence because the country that used them pretends they don't exist. How many? In this city, maybe 30. Nationwide, hundreds. Maybe thousands." Jessica pulled out a phone, showed Rachel photos. Men and women, all ages, all carrying that 1,000-yard stare Rachel had learned to recognize. They need what Foster House provides: community, understanding, a place to exist without questions. Foster House has to follow regulations, background checks, documentation. I know, that's why I'm not asking you to take them to Foster House. Jessica stood, resolution hardening her features. I'm asking you to help me create something new, something specifically for them. Footsteps echoed through the tunnels. David's voice crackled through the earpiece. "They're in the system, multiple entry points. You need to move." Jessica led them deeper through passages that narrowed and widened past junction points marked with symbols Rachel didn't recognize. Finally, they emerged through a drainage grate into an alley behind a row of warehouses. A van waited, engine running. Behind the wheel sat a man Rachel recognized with a shock, Michael Reeves, who'd supposedly died in Syria 2 years ago. She'd attended his memorial service, comforted his widow. "Hello, Officer Turner," Michael said quietly. "Sorry about the funeral. It was necessary." The world tilted. Rachel grabbed the van for support. "You're dead. Your wife, your kids, they think you're dead. It's better than knowing what I became, what I did." His hands gripped the wheel with white-knuckle force. "Get in! Those weren't random thugs in the factory. They're contractors cleaning up loose ends. We need to move." David materialized from the shadows, weapon drawn, but not quite aimed. "Rachel, what the hell is happening?" "I wish I knew." She made a decision based on instinct, the same instinct that had made her stop that night in the rain. "We're getting in the van." The ride was silent, except for Jessica giving directions. They ended up at a warehouse that looked abandoned from outside, but hummed with hidden life inside. The space had been converted, military precision evident in the layout. Cots lined one wall, a kitchen area occupied a corner, and a dozen people looked up as they entered. Rachel recognized the look in their eyes, the same haunted exhaustion she'd seen in David when they first met in William, dying in the textile factory, and Charles fighting his past. But underneath was something else: fear of discovery, of consequences for things they couldn't speak about. "This is our shelter," Jessica explained. "Unofficial, unfunded, probably illegal. We pool resources, share food, watch each other's backs. But we're drowning. 3 suicides in the last month. We need real help, but we can't exist officially." An older man approached, grizzled and wary. "You brought a cop here." "She's different," Jessica insisted. "She helped Tony. She understands." "Nobody understands unless they've been there." The man's accent suggested Eastern European origins. "Unless they've done things that don't go in reports, that don't get medals, that eat you alive from inside." David stepped forward. "Kandahar, 2009. Operation Red Wing." The man's eyes widened. That didn't happen. No, it didn't. But I was there. Second squad covering extraction. David pulled up his sleeve, revealing a scar Rachel had never asked about. Phosphorus burns from the warehouse fire, the one that killed those kids. Silence descended like a weight. The man studied David for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You understand. Rachel felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. David had never told her about Red Wing, about kids dying, about operations that didn't exist. How many secrets did the man she loved carry? We're not asking for much, Jessica continued. Just someone to know we exist. Someone who can maybe help when one of us is in crisis. Someone who won't ask questions we can't answer. You're asking me to operate outside the law? Rachel said carefully. We're asking you to operate inside humanity, Michael corrected. The law doesn't account for us. We're ghosts, but we're still human. We still need help. Rachel looked around the warehouse shelter, counted 15 people, maybe 20, each representing service that couldn't be acknowledged, trauma that couldn't be processed, sacrifice that couldn't be honored. What about therapy medication? There's a doctor, Jessica said. Former Navy. She was at Guantanamo involved in enhanced interrogation. She can't practice officially anymore, but she helps us. And there's a VA psychologist who sees us off the books, risks his license every session. But it's not enough. David moved through the space reading it with trained eyes. You need more than medical help. You need structure, purpose, community. Like Foster House, someone called out. Foster House is visible, Rachel said. You're saying you need to stay invisible. Not invisible, Jessica corrected. Anonymous. There's a difference. Over the next hours, they talked, shared stories in vague terms, outcomes without specifics. Rachel learned about operations in countries America wasn't supposed to be in, actions that violated international law but were deemed necessary, the human cost of plausible deniability. One woman, Carol, had been a drone operator. I killed a wedding party, faulty intelligence, 43 dead, including children. Command said it never happened, but I see their faces every night. A young man, maybe Marcus's age in 15 years, talked about interrogations in black sites. They gave us drugs to keep us awake, keep us aggressive. Now I can't sleep without seeing what I did. Each story was a weight, a burden these people carried alone because officially their trauma didn't exist. They couldn't even name their pain without risking prosecution or worse. What do you need? Rachel finally asked. A place, Jessica said, like this but better. Legal enough that we won't be rated, anonymous enough that we won't be found, and someone to bridge the gap between us and the resources we need. Rachel's mind raced through possibilities. Property laws, zoning regulations, ways to create something that existed in the gray spaces of bureaucracy. It was possible maybe, but it would require careful navigation. I need time, she said, and I need to talk to some people. Carefully, Michael warned. The people in the factory, they're watchers, making sure we stay quiet, stay hidden. If they think we're becoming a problem, he didn't need to finish. Rachel understood. These people weren't just traumatized, they were potential liabilities to powerful interests who preferred their sins stayed buried. Back in the van driving toward dawn, David was quiet. Finally, Rachel asked, Red Wing what? Classified. Even talking about it could mean federal prison. He paused. But yes, it happened. Yes, children died. Yes, I was there. And yes, I understand why those people need help. Why didn't you tell me? Because loving someone means protecting them from your worst parts. Because some secrets are prisons, and I didn't want you locked in with me. Rachel reached over, taking his hand. We're already locked in together. Your demons are my demons. That's not how it works. That's exactly how it works. Family means carrying each other's weight. They drove in silence until David suddenly pulled over. There might be a way to help them. How? Remember Father Miguel from the shelter? Rachel did. An ancient priest who ran a soup kitchen and never asked questions about the people he served. His church was one of the oldest in the city, with Byzantine property rights that predated modern zoning laws. He has that abandoned rectory, David continued, the one behind the church. 3 stories, good bones, isolated enough for privacy, but close enough to resources. Would he do it? Miguel was a chaplain in Vietnam. He knows about secrets that eat souls he might understand. They met with Father Miguel that afternoon in his cluttered office that smelled of coffee and old books. The priest listened without interrupting as Rachel explained carefully, vaguely, about veterans who needed help but couldn't exist officially. "Ghost soldiers," Miguel said when she finished. "I've known many. They confess to me sometimes things that happened in places that don't exist to people who were never there." "Can you help?" Miguel studied them with eyes that had seen 7 decades of human frailty and resilience. "The rectory is church property, protected by religious freedom laws. What happens there is between God and conscience. We'd need to renovate, make it livable. I know contractors who don't ask questions, parishioners who donate materials that fall off trucks. The Lord provides especially for those who've already been to hell." Within a month, the rectory transformation began. Officially, it was becoming a meditation retreat for spiritual healing. Unofficially, Jessica and her people worked at night, turning it into a sanctuary for ghost soldiers. No names on leases, no official records, just anonymous space for people who didn't exist to start existing again. Rachel navigated the legal maze with skills learned from 3 years of bending rules for Foster House. David provided tactical planning security measures, escape routes if needed. William, once he learned about it, contributed his veteran network people who could provide services without documentation. Charles painted murals in the common areas, abstract pieces that somehow captured the feeling of carrying unspeakable secrets. When asked who they were for, he simply said, "People who need beauty more than answers." The first official resident was Carol, the drone operator. She arrived with a single backpack and eyes that hadn't closed properly in months. Father Miguel blessed the space, offering absolution for sins that couldn't be named. "You're safe here," he told her. "God knows what happened, even if history won't." The Ghost Soldier Sanctuary, as David privately called it, grew slowly. Never more than a dozen residents at a time, cycling through as they stabilized. Some eventually transitioned to Foster House under assumed names. Others disappeared back into shadow, but with skills to cope, connections to maintain knowledge that they weren't alone. The doctor Jessica had mentioned, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, no relation to David, set up an unofficial clinic in the basement. She'd lost her license for refusing to participate in enhanced interrogations, but her hands still knew how to heal. The VA psychologist, Dr. Marcus Williams, held group sessions where the only rule was that specifics stayed unspoken. They talked around their trauma using metaphors and analogies, finding ways to process pain without naming operations or locations. 3 months into the sanctuary's operation, crisis arrived. One of the residents, a man known only as Tom, had a psychotic break. Flashbacks to something that happened in Somalia or maybe Yemen, geography blurred when operations didn't exist. He barricaded himself in his room with a weapon, seeing enemies in shadows. Rachel and David responded to Jessica's call. The police couldn't be involved, too many questions. The VA couldn't help, Tom didn't exist in their system. It was just them facing a trained operator in full paranoid crisis. "Let me try," David said, and Rachel heard in his voice the echo of his own breaks, his own nights fighting wars that had officially ended. David sat outside Tom's door for 6 hours, talking softly about nothing and everything, about Scout's loyalty, about Marcus's drawings, about the way rain sounded different after combat, how it could trigger memories or wash them clean, never asking Tom to respond, just creating a bridge of words between crisis and calm. Finally, Tom's voice came through the door. "I killed kids, not intentionally, but they're still dead." "I know," David replied. "I carry mine too, 7 of them in a warehouse that burned because of bad intelligence." "How do you live with it?" "By helping other kids live, by being present for my son, by choosing to be better than my worst moment. It doesn't erase anything, but it adds to the other side of the scale." The door opened. Tom stood there, weapon lowered, tears streaming. "I don't know how to be better. Nobody does at first, but you learn. One day, one choice, one breath at a time." Dr. Chen sedated Tom gently, and he slept for 18 hours. When he woke, the crisis had passed, but the conversation with David had planted something, not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. Word spread through invisible networks. Ghost soldiers from other cities inquired about Sanctuary. Rachel found herself fielding calls from people who officially didn't exist, creating an underground railroad of healing for America's most secret casualties. But success brought attention. The contractors who'd chased them through the factory hadn't given up. They watched, waited, looked for weakness. Rachel started noticing surveillance vehicles that appeared too often, faces that turned away too quickly. "They're going to move against us," Jessica warned during one of their planning meetings. "Too many people know now. Someone will talk or sell out or make a mistake." "So we get ahead of it," Rachel suggested. "Control the narrative." "How? We can't go public. Half these people would be arrested or assassinated if their stories came out." David had been quiet, but now he spoke. "We don't reveal the stories, we reveal the need." He outlined a plan that was ambitious and dangerous. Invite select journalists, the kind with reputations for protecting sources. Show them the sanctuary without revealing operations or identities. Create public pressure for official recognition of ghost soldiers without exposing individual ghosts. "It's risky," Father Miguel said, "but so is doing nothing." They chose carefully. 3 journalists with track records of ethical reporting and source protection. Rachel coordinated the visits, David provided security. Jessica managed the residents' anonymity. The stories that emerged were masterpieces of revealed truth and protected secrets. Veterans who don't exist. The shadow cost of secret wars ran in the Washington Post. No names, no operations, no specifics that could identify individuals. Just the reality that America had soldiers suffering from traumas they couldn't acknowledge, needing help they couldn't officially receive. The response was immediate and polarized. Government officials denied everything. Veterans groups demanded investigations. Civil rights lawyers offered pro bono services. And quietly, very quietly, certain agencies began reaching out. A woman calling herself Smith appeared at the rectory one evening. Government written all over her, but also something else, perhaps conscience, perhaps pragmatism. "We know what you're doing," she told Rachel and Jessica. "Some people want you stopped. Others think you're providing a service we can't officially provide. I'm here to propose a compromise." The deal was this: the sanctuary could continue, even receive indirect funding through blind trusts and anonymous donations. In exchange, absolute discretion. No more journalists, no public advocacy, no official recognition. The ghost soldiers would remain ghosts, but they'd be supported ghosts. "That's not enough," Jessica argued. "They deserve acknowledgement." "They deserve to not be in federal prison or foreign graves," Smith countered. "This is what's possible. Take it or watch everything you've built be destroyed." Rachel wanted to fight to demand justice instead of shadows. But she looked at the reality: 20 people getting help who'd had none more arriving each month, lives being saved, even if they couldn't be celebrated. "We take the deal," she decided, overriding Jessica's objections. "But we keep pushing privately. Every ghost we save is evidence that the system needs to change." The sanctuary evolved under its new constraints. Officially, it remained Father Miguel's meditation retreat. Unofficially, it became a crucial way station for America's most hidden veterans. The funding Smith had promised materialized. Never traced, never acknowledged, but real enough to provide food, medicine, and most importantly, time to heal. Some residents discovered peace. Tom, the operator who'd barricaded himself, became the sanctuary's unofficial maintenance chief, finding salvation in fixing broken things. Carol started teaching art therapy, following Charles's model, but adapting it for people whose stories couldn't be told directly. They painted their demons in abstract forms, exercising through color what couldn't be spoken in words. Others passed through briefly, gathering just enough strength to continue carrying their secrets. A few didn't make it, suicide claimed 2 residents despite all efforts. Each loss hit the community hard reminder that some wounds went too deep for healing, but more survived than died. More found ways to live with unspeakable memories than surrendered to them. The sanctuary became proof that even ghosts could be saved, even if salvation came in shadows. One evening, as Rachel walked through the sanctuary checking on residents, she found David in the chapel with Tom and 3 others, not praying but talking quietly about something that had happened in Mosul. No details, just the careful dance of shared experience without exposure. "You understand," Tom was saying, "the weight of it, how it changes everything, even your dreams." David nodded. "But the weight becomes bearable when shared. Not lighter, but bearable." This was the real miracle, not the building or the funding or the official blindness, but the community. Ghost soldiers discovering they weren't alone in their haunting, that others carried similar secrets, similar shame, similar hope for redemption that might never come but was worth seeking anyway. As Rachel left them to their careful communion, she thought about the journey from that night in the rain to now. How saving one life had led to saving dozens, then hundreds. How David's courage had inspired her courage, which had inspired Jessica's, which had inspired countless others. Foster House now had 6 locations nationwide, all thriving. The Ghost Sanctuary remained singular but served as a model for similar underground efforts in other cities. The invisible were becoming visible even if some had to remain in shadow for safety. Her phone buzzed text from Marcus, now 11, and even more perceptive. "Dad's at the sanctuary again. Tell him dinner's at 7, and tell Tom his dog is welcome too. Scout needs friends." Rachel smiled. Marcus understood more than they'd told him, absorbed the fundamental lesson of their unconventional family. Everyone deserved belonging, even if they couldn't fully belong to the official world. Walking back to her car, Rachel noticed a van parked across the street watching. The watchers never fully went away, Smith had warned. They'd always be there making sure the ghost stayed ghostly, the secret stayed secret. But that was acceptable, as long as the healing could continue. Tomorrow she'd return to Foster House to the visible veterans who could claim their service and trauma openly. Tonight she'd go home to David and Marcus, to their chosen family, built on saved lives and shared purpose. But part of her would always remain here in this shadow sanctuary, where America's most hidden casualties learned to live with wounds that officially never happened. The rain began again as she drove home, gentle this time, washing the city clean. She thought of William now, managing 3 foster houses, of Charles, whose art hung in galleries under a pseudonym because his past still followed him, of Sarah and Lily, thriving in their new life, of all the invisible people made visible, and those who had to stay invisible but didn't have to stay alone. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other, with Rachel finishing paperwork, while David helped Marcus with algebra homework that had gotten considerably more complex now that the boy was 14. The phone's shrill ring cut through the apartment's peaceful rhythm, and Rachel knew before answering that their carefully constructed world was about to shift again. "Officer Turner." The voice was young, scared familiar, but not immediately placeable. "It's Lily, Sarah's daughter, my mom. Something's wrong. She won't wake up, and there's so much blood." Rachel was moving before the sentence ended, David already grabbing his keys. Marcus stirring from his room with the instinct of a child who'd learned to read crisis in adult movements. "Lily, did you call 911? "Yes, but there's something else. There's a man here. He says he's my father. He says he's taking me when the ambulance comes. Officer Turner, I don't want to go with him." The address Lily gave was 20 minutes away, but David made it in 12 running red lights, with the kind of precision that spoke of escape routes practiced in darker times. Rachel called it in as they drove. "Domestic disturbance possible, kidnapping attempt, officer responding." She didn't mention that she was off duty, that this was personal, that Sarah and Lily had become family in every way that mattered. They found chaos. Ambulance lights painted the apartment complex in alternating red and white, paramedics working on Sarah, who lay unconscious on the kitchen floor, a pool of blood spreading from a head wound. Lily stood in the corner, a uniformed officer between her and a man Rachel recognized with a cold shock, Derek Matthews, Sarah's ex-husband, the one she'd fled from, the reason she'd been living in her car when David found her. "That's my daughter," Derek was saying, his voice carrying the reasonable tone of someone used to manipulating authority. "Her mother is obviously unfit. I have rights." The uniformed officer, young and uncertain, looked relieved when Rachel arrived. "Turner, this gentleman says he's the father. He has documentation." Rachel looked at the papers. Derek held custody documents from 3 years ago, before Sarah had fled, before the restraining order, before Foster House had given them sanctuary. Technically valid if you didn't know the history, if you ignored the bruises Sarah had hidden, the terror Lily had lived with. "Those are outdated," Rachel said calmly, though calm was the last thing she felt. "There's a restraining order. He's not supposed to be within 500 feet of them." Derek's expression shifted, the mask slipping slightly. "That was a misunderstanding. Sarah was emotional, made accusations. I've been in therapy. I have rights as a father." David moved quietly to Lily's side while Rachel engaged Derek, creating a human barrier without obvious confrontation. The girl pressed against him, trembling, and he put a protective hand on her shoulder, the same gesture he used with Marcus during nightmares. "Lily," Rachel said gently, not taking her eyes off Derek. "What happened to your mom?" "He pushed her," Lily whispered. "She hit her head on the counter. He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt her worse." Derek's face flushed. "She's lying. Kids make things up. Her mother has poisoned her against me." The paramedics were loading Sarah onto a gurney, her face pale, breathing shallow. One of them caught Rachel's eye, shook his head slightly. Serious. Possibly critical. They needed to move fast. "Lily's coming with us," Rachel stated, not asking. "Like hell she is." Derek stepped forward, and suddenly the reasonable mask vanished entirely. "That's my blood, my property. You think some foster cop and her homeless boyfriend can keep her from me?" The slur hung in the air. David's body tensed, combat ready, but his voice remained level. "Sarah has full custody. You have no legal right to Lily. Step back." "Or what? You'll assault me." "Please do. My lawyer would love that." Derek smiled, the expression of someone who'd always used the system as a weapon. "I know all about you, David Chen, unstable veteran, PTSD, living off a cop girlfriend. What judge is going to side with you over a successful businessman and biological father?" Rachel felt the trap closing. Derek had done his homework, knew their vulnerabilities. In a legal battle, his resources could overwhelm them. But this wasn't a courtroom yet, and Rachel had learned things in 5 years of protecting the vulnerable that the academy never taught. "Officer Martinez," she called to the young cop, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Please note that Mr. Matthews just admitted to being present when Sarah was injured. Given Lily's statement that he pushed her mother, he needs to be detained for questioning." "That's ridiculous. It's procedure." Rachel's voice carried the authority of someone who knew exactly how to weaponize bureaucracy. "Lily, you're coming to the station to give a formal statement. Mr. Matthews, you can call your lawyer from holding." Derek's face contorted with rage. "You can't." "I can and I am." Rachel nodded to Martinez, who looked uncertain but moved to comply. "Cuff him." What happened next occurred in fragments too fast for prevention, but slow enough in memory to haunt. Derek lunged not for Martinez, but for Lily, hands reaching for the child with possessive fury. David moved to intercept. They collided with the force of opposing worlds, Derek's entitled rage against David's protective instinct. The fight was brief, but vicious. Derek had size and fury, but David had training and purpose. Within seconds, Derek was on the ground. David's knee on his back, the position speaking of muscle memory from distant battlefields. But Derek's head had hit the coffee table on the way down, blood now mixing with Sarah's on the floor. "Police brutality," Derek screamed. "I want him arrested. I'll sue everyone." More officers arrived, confusion multiplying. Derek was rich, white, articulate in his outrage. David was everything society taught police to suspect. For a moment, Rachel saw it going wrong, saw David in handcuffs, Derek winning through systematic prejudice. Then William appeared in the doorway, dignified, even in pajamas and a robe. Behind him stood James Charles Maria and a dozen other foster house residents. They'd heard the call go out on the network they'd built their own emergency system for when family was threatened. "We all saw what happened," William announced with the authority of age and bronze stars. "That man attacked a child. Mr. Chen defended her. We're all witnesses." Derek looked at the assembled crowd, veterans formerly homeless people society usually ignored, and saw them seeing him. Really seeing him. Not his money or suit or careful words, but the predator underneath. Martinez made the right choice. Derek was cuffed, arrested for assault, violation of a restraining order, and child endangerment. As they led him away, he snarled at Rachel. "This isn't over. I'll destroy all of you. That girl is mine by blood." "Blood doesn't make family," Marcus said quietly from the doorway where he'd been watching. "Choice does." The wisdom of a 14-year-old who'd learned it the hard way silenced Derek more effectively than any threat. At the hospital, Sarah remained unconscious. Traumatic brain injury, the doctors said. Unclear if she'd wake up and if she did, what capacity she'd have. Lily sat in the waiting room, suddenly orphaned by violence, even though her mother still breathed. "What happens to me?" she asked Rachel, in a voice too small for her 11 years. Rachel looked at David, saw her answer reflected in his eyes. You come home with us. We're your emergency contacts, your guardians if needed. Sarah set it all up years ago after Foster House. She knew Derek might come back. But Derek wasn't done. Within 48 hours, his lawyers filed for emergency custody. His argument was simple and potentially effective: biological father with resources versus unrelated guardians with complicated histories. He painted Rachel as a rogue cop who bent rules, David as an unstable veteran with violent tendencies, Foster House as a dangerous environment for children. The initial hearing was a disaster. Derek's lawyer, Margaret Stone, was the kind of legal predator who specialized in custody battles where money mattered more than merit. She had investigators who dug up everything: David's classified missions that looked suspicious in their redaction, Rachel's disciplinary warnings for excessive humanitarian involvement, Charles's criminal record, the ghost sanctuary that looked like conspiracy on paper. Your Honor, Stone argued, we have a biological father of means and standing versus a collection of social experiments. Foster homes for criminals, secret shelters, a police officer who operates outside the law. Is this really the environment for a traumatized child? Judge Patricia Hawkins, new to family court, looked overwhelmed by the competing narratives. On paper, Derek looked stable, successful, reformed. The restraining order was old, his therapy records, carefully curated, showed progress, and his resources were undeniable. Rachel and David's lawyer, a public defender named Janet Ross, who was brilliant but overworked, did her best. But she had 20 other cases and no investigators. The system that had saved so many was working against them now. That night in their apartment with Lily, trying to sleep in Marcus's room while nightmares stalked her, Rachel and David strategized with the Foster House community. They needed something decisive, something that would show who Derek really was beneath his careful presentation. I might have something, Jessica said from the computer where she'd been searching. Derek's company, Matthews Industries. They have defense contracts. Some of them are familiar. She pulled up shipping manifests, contract numbers, classified program codes that meant nothing to most but everything to those who'd lived in shadow operations. Matthews Industries had supplied equipment to black sites, the kind of places where enhanced interrogation happened, where ghost soldiers were made and broken. He profited from our pain, Tom said quietly, recognizing a requisition number from a place he couldn't name but would never forget. It's not enough, Rachel said. The contracts are legal even if what they supplied wasn't ethical. Judge won't care. But Senator Crawford might, Williams suggested. He's been pushing for investigation into contractor accountability. This connects. The plan they hatched was complex, dangerous, potentially illegal. But Lily's future hung in the balance, and they'd all learned that sometimes the system required creative pressure to bend toward justice. Jessica and Tom worked their ghost networks, gathering testimony that couldn't officially exist, but painted Derek as a war profiteer who'd supplied tools of torture. Charles created visual documentation, not evidence exactly, but art that captured truth. Maria coordinated foster house families who'd been helped by Sarah, creating a chorus of support. Marcus, showing his father's tactical mind, suggested they needed Derek to reveal himself, not just be exposed. He has a temper, Lily had told them. When he gets angry, he can't hide who he really is. The second hearing was scheduled for a Friday. Thursday night, Derek received a package. Inside were Charles's paintings, abstract but unmistakable depictions of implements Matthews Industries had provided, tools that had broken bodies and minds. No accusation, no threat, just art that spoke truth. Derek arrived at court furious, his careful composure cracked. Stone tried to calm him, but rage had taken root. When he saw the Foster House contingent in the gallery, 20 strong, all people Sarah had helped, something snapped. During cross-examination, Janet Ross was brilliant. She asked simple questions that Derek should have answered simply. But he was seeing ghosts in the gallery, recognizing Tom and others who'd survived places his equipment had helped create. His answers became erratic, aggressive. Mr. Matthews, why did Sarah leave you? Because she was weak, couldn't handle discipline. Discipline. A man has rights in his own home, authority over his wife and daughter. They're mine. The possessive fury broke through. My blood, my property, my right to shape as I see fit. Janet let the words hang. Let the court reporter capture them. let Judge Hawkins see the predator Derek had always been. But the decisive moment came from an unexpected source. Senator Crawford himself entered the courtroom not as a senator, but as a character witness. William had called in his ultimate favor. "Your Honor," Crawford said after being sworn in, "I'm here to speak about Sarah Mitchell and the family that has cared for her daughter. I've investigated Mr. Matthews' business dealings as part of a federal inquiry I cannot discuss in detail. What I can say is that no child should be placed in his custody. The foster family requesting guardianship Officer Turner and Mr. Chen represent the best of American values. They've saved lives, including veterans under my committee's purview. Lily would be safe with them. With her biological father, she would be in danger." The weight of a senator's testimony, carefully worded to avoid classification, but clear in its message, tipped the scales. But Derek made one last desperate play. "She's my blood!" he shouted, standing despite his lawyer's attempts to restrain him. "You can't give my daughter to some cop and her broken veteran boyfriend. I have rights." "You have no rights to a child you traumatized," Judge Hawkins said, her uncertainty crystallizing into conviction. "Biology doesn't override safety. Temporary guardianship is awarded to Officer Turner and Mr. Chen pending Sarah Mitchell's recovery. Mr. Matthews, you're remanded for violation of court order and contempt." As bailiffs moved toward Derek, he lunged again, not for Lily this time, but for David. "You took everything from me." David didn't move, didn't flinch. "No, you threw it away. We just caught what you discarded." The tackle from the bailiffs was rough but necessary. Derek went down screaming about lawsuits and revenge, but his voice faded as they dragged him away. The war profiteer who'd supplied suffering was finally experiencing consequence. In the hallway, after Lily hugged David and Rachel simultaneously, her thin arms trying to encompass both. "Does this mean I can stay as long as you want?" Rachel promised. "What about Mom?" That was the harder question. Sarah remained unconscious, machines breathing for her brain activity, minimal but present. The doctors gave no timeline, no real hope, just the terrible limbo of traumatic injury. They developed a routine. Morning visits before school, evening visits after. Lily read to her mother, telling her about her days maintaining connection to a consciousness that might or might not hear. Marcus often came to understanding the weight of potentially losing a parent, offering the quiet companionship of shared experience. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, as autumn painted the city in gold and amber, Sarah's eyes opened. Not fully. Not with recognition, but opened. Lily was reading from a book about dragons, Sarah's favorite from when Lily was small and saw the flutter of eyelashes. "Mom?" Sarah's eyes tracked toward the voice, focusing with obvious effort. Her mouth moved no sound at first, then a whisper, "Lily." The celebration was quiet, but profound. Sarah's recovery would be long, possibly incomplete. The injury had taken things fine motor control, some memory, the easy confidence she'd rebuilt at Foster House. But she was alive, aware, and fighting. Derek's trial became a sensation. The connection to defense contractors and black sites, carefully leaked by Jessica through untraceable channels, painted him as symbol of everything wrong with the military-industrial complex. His wealth became liability, his connection suspicious. Matthews Industries lost its contracts. Derek himself got 5 years for assault and child endangerment, though his lawyers would likely reduce it to 2. But the real victory was smaller, quieter. It was Lily doing homework at the kitchen table while Marcus helped with math. It was Sarah relearning to walk with David's support, his understanding of traumatic injury, making him the perfect coach. It was Rachel navigating the legal system to formalize guardianship, ensuring Lily would never be vulnerable to biological claims again. One evening, as the extended family gathered for dinner at Foster House, a tradition that had grown to include 40 regular attendees, William stood to speak. 5 years ago, I nearly died alone in an abandoned building. Today, I sit at a table with family I chose and who chose me. We've all been broken. Sarah's injury reminds us that breaking can happen again suddenly, unfairly. But this time, she didn't face it alone. Neither did Lily. That's the revolution we've created, not changing the system overnight, but ensuring no one faces their breaking alone. Charles had painted a new mural during Sarah's recovery. It showed a tree, his signature image, but this one was different. The roots were visible above ground, intertwining, creating a network of support that held the tree upright despite the storm painted in the background. In the branches were faces, everyone at the table, and more, the visible and invisible, all connected. "It's beautiful," Sarah said from her wheelchair, speech slow but clear. "We're all holding each other up." "That's the point," Charles replied. "No single root is strong enough alone. But together, we're unbreakable." The ghost sanctuary had evolved too. Smith, the government handler, had quietly increased funding after Derek's trial revealed the human cost of black operations. More ghosts found their way to Father Miguel's rectory, found peace in anonymous community. Some, like Tom, eventually transitioned to public life, their past sealed, but their future open. Others remained shadows, but shadows with support, no longer alone in their darkness. Jessica had started a newsletter, encrypted, anonymous but real, connecting ghost soldiers nationwide. Stories shared without names, resources offered without documentation, hope spreading through invisible networks. The government watched, but didn't interfere, perhaps recognizing that this underground healing served their interests better than suicides and psychotic breaks. One morning, Rachel found David on the roof of their building watching the sunrise. It was a ritual he'd developed, greeting each day he'd survived, each dawn, that meant another chance to be better than his worst moments. "Thinking about Derek?" she asked, joining him. "Thinking about cycles," he corrected. "Derek perpetuated trauma, supplied tools for it, inflicted it on his family. We're trying to break those cycles, but sometimes I wonder if we're just treating symptoms." "Maybe, but symptoms matter to the people experiencing them. Sarah matters. Lily matters. Every person at Foster House matters." David pulled her close, and they stood watching the city wake. 5 years since that night in the rain, their family had grown from 3 to dozens, their impact from one saved life to hundreds. The system hadn't changed much. Poverty still created invisibility. Trauma still went untreated. Veterans still fell through cracks. But in their corner of the city, they'd woven a net of human connection that caught the falling. Marcus appeared on the roof, taller now at 14, carrying coffee for all three. "Lily's making breakfast. She says if you're not down in 5 minutes, she's giving your bacon to Scout." The dog, gray now around her muzzle, but still loyal, wagged her tail at the mention of bacon. The family descended together, finding their apartment full of chosen family. Sarah was at the stove, despite her limitations, Lily helping her, the two of them rebuilding their relationship with each careful movement. William had stopped by with news about Foster House 7's opening. Charles brought sketches for a new mural. Tom and Jessica discussed expanding ghost sanctuary networks. This was what victory looked like, not dramatic rescues or legal triumphs, but breakfast with people who'd chosen to see each other, support each other, save each other, one day at a time. The revolution wasn't televised or celebrated. It happened in kitchens and hospitals and sanctuaries and courtrooms, in the quiet moments when someone who'd been invisible was finally fully seen. As Rachel helped serve breakfast, she thought about the next challenges. There would be more Dereks, more systems that favored power over people. There would be more falls, more breaking, more nights when the weight seemed unbearable. But there would also be more mornings like this, full of chosen family, shared purpose, and the radical belief that everyone deserved to be caught when they fell. The work continued. Foster House expanded. The ghost sanctuary evolved. Sarah recovered slowly but steadily. Lily thrived in the stability of a family that had fought for her. Marcus grew into his father's courage and his mother's compassion, because that's what Rachel had become, not through birth or law, but through choice and time. 5 years ago, David had saved Rachel from a knife in the rain. But the real salvation had been everything after the choice to see invisible people, to catch the falling, to build family from broken pieces. They'd created their own system, their own safety net, their own definition of home. As breakfast conversation filled the apartment with warmth and belonging, Rachel caught David's eye across the crowded room. He smiled, that expression that still transformed his face, that spoke of journey from desperate father to community pillar, from invisible to essential. She smiled back, knowing their story was far from over. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle this time, watering the gardens Marcus had planted at every foster house. The rain that had brought them together now nurtured what they'd grown. And in buildings across the city, invisible people were becoming visible, ghost soldiers were finding peace, and the revolution of seeing each other continued, one saved life at a time. The system hadn't changed, but they had. And in changing, they'd created space for others to change too. That was the real victory, not defeating the system, but building something better alongside it. Something that caught the fallen and helped them rise. Something that proved family wasn't about blood, but about choice, about showing up, about seeing truth even when it was easier to look away. Sarah's hand found Lily's as they cooked together, relearning each other after trauma. Marcus helped Tom with computer skills, bridging generations and experiences. William told stories that made everyone laugh. Charles sketched them all, capturing the moment. Jessica coordinated the next ghost extraction. And at the center of it all, Rachel and David stood together. Partners in the deepest sense, two people who'd saved each other and then kept saving others, building a family that couldn't be broken because it had been forged from breaking and chosen wholeness anyway.